The knights rise, looking to where the power stands before them. They exclaim, wanting to see the emperor, the same one who forced the enemies to their knees. It was he who defeated the traitorous merchants. The knights praise and glorify his name. They exclaim that it was their emperor who defeated the infidels. They consider themselves great defenders of their faith. They are sure that they are protecting the Messiah himself. The knights joyfully raise their hands and exclaim that they have already crossed seas, mountains, and deserts, and conquered 3 continents. A majestic figure of a horseman appears on the edge of the mountain. The knights loudly shout that they are the glorious heroes of Lemurin. This noble man's name is Hercules, supreme emperor of 3 continents, lord of divine light. This is Hercules the First. Hercules proudly raises his sword, listening to the enthusiastic exclamations of his subordinates. Once upon a time, there lived an emperor who managed to transform the declining Lemurian Empire into a powerful state that stretched across 3 continents. The story of Hercules begins in early childhood. In the territory of Lemuria, little Hercules runs frantically, screaming that this will not happen. He gallops on horseback, loudly exclaiming that he never aspired to be emperor. Hercules is the 3rd prince of the declining empire of Lemuria, which is already living out its last days. The death of his father, the late Emperor Hadrian III, left the throne vacant. Originally, he was not supposed to inherit the throne at all, but his 2 older brothers were very poorly educated and completely unsuitable as heirs. Now it was he who had to make the choice and become the next emperor. For Burke, the very thought of becoming emperor of even a small and weak country is a real torment, let alone a great power. It seems to him more severe than any punishment, and Hercules is furious, because due to the recklessness of his brothers, he is now forced to rule an entire country. He exclaims that he dreams of living the rest of his days calmly and without haste. But at that very moment, the girl behind him remarks that Hercules should not be so selfish. Hercules immediately recognizes this voice and realizes that he has already been counted out. It is Carolina, his childhood friend, who has always watched over him and kept him from doing anything stupid. Hercules was furious. He could not have imagined that she would go so far just to catch him. Carolina rushes after him and asks why he is running away. He is surprised and asks if she is still chasing him. Carolina replies with a smile that she will not catch up with him without running. She shouts after him, demanding that he stop running and become emperor. He turns angrily and asks if she is joking. He has no intention of becoming the ruler of a weak and devastated country that may soon disappear. And suddenly Carolina reaches out, grabs him by the collar, jerks sharply, and Hercules flies off the horse, falling to the ground. He doesn't have time to come to his senses or open his eyes properly before Caroline has already straddled him so much that he can't even get up. She proudly declares to him that she caught him, and Hercules only grits his teeth angrily and looks at her with resentment. The Lemurian Empire once spanned 3 continents, being the most powerful force in the world. Its influence was felt in military affairs, economics, and culture, and its mark on human history has been felt. This powerful empire, which left its mark on history, was created by the elves. The priests, the women, all the power, everything was in the hands of the elves. However, this state, once considered the most powerful in the world, was torn apart by civil war into eastern and western parts, with the western half destroyed. The Eastern Lemurian Empire also gradually declined due to attacks from various peoples. Hercules ponders. When a state has lost 60% of its possessions and is still in decline, and trade in a country that lacks arable land and access to the sea becomes almost impossible. Perhaps this is the cause of all the troubles, he thinks. At this moment, an old man approaches the boys in the field and asks how they are doing. The youth immediately recognize him as the 19th emperor of the Lemurian Empire, Hadrian III. They bow respectfully and reply that everything is going well, thanks to Ila's efforts. He says that if everything goes well, the country will not starve this year. He takes responsibility for this choice and sincerely apologizes to the common people for all these difficulties. They turn to Hercules, the little boy next to them, and ask how he is doing. After all, they live on large lands, and it is up to them to decide how this country will develop further. Hercules sits silently, absorbed in reading a book. He is told to follow, but he does not react or obey. He approaches him and offers to take him on a tour of these lands, assuring him that he can finish reading the book later. Hercules raises his head, looks around, and, seeing only a wheat field, decides it's better to immerse himself in reading a book again. She takes the book from him and says that whoever wrote this story saw the world as it really is. This book seems to have preserved a trace of the real world. But, she adds, just reading it still won't give you the same emotions that real life brings. Hercules turns away, offended by her words. Percolus looks around and notices 2 people busy working. He turns to his father and asks what they are doing. He says that they harvest wheat from the ears, then grind it into grain and bake it into bread, which serves as food. He notices that their hands are already getting tired from holding the weapon, and thinks that it must be quite uncomfortable to use it. Hercules points to the others and asks his father, maybe try using something like a comb instead of sticks. It stops in confusion and doesn't understand what these events are about. As a result, everyone around it tries to figure it out and also gets involved. The workers happily exclaim that everything is so easy and their hands don't get tired at all. And the little girl adds with delight, now she can grind several ears of corn at once. Hercules explains that instead of trying to pull the fetus out with one hand, it is much easier to do it with both hands, allowing it to pull under its own weight. And if you make a small platform, even small children can use it, he alludes to the little girl. Hercules proudly declares that this will help them save a lot of energy and significantly increase their productivity. His father replies with a smile that this is great. The echo of a strange, drawn-out sound, spread throughout the room. Like a continuous stream, this strange hum was endlessly repeated, as if someone was deliberately launching it in waves. It seemed as if the very air around had fallen silent and was listening to this meaningless, mysterious melody that had neither beginning nor end. No one made an effort to understand the meaning of this sound, because it was simply a part of this story, its strange chord, with which everything around took a pause. He looks away and awkwardly admits that he only heard about it from some foreign book. His father replies with a smile that he has a real smart son. Hercules thought, there is nothing like it in their library and archives. However, Hercules has his own secret. He has knowledge of cutting-edge science and technology, but he prefers to keep it a secret. People often called him a prodigy, and his father always granted his every wish. But it is precisely because of this knowledge that he loses his freedom, and his capabilities are greatly overestimated. Returning to the present day, Caroline insists that he finally become emperor. Hercules glances at Carolina, who is pressing her hand against his, begins to feel embarrassed, and, blushing, asks her to get off him first because, she says, it's a bit difficult for her. Caroline says that if she gets off, he will run away again. She starts to tell him that she feels something hard under her, but then Hercules, in panic and hysterics, starts screaming loudly. Caroline again begins to persuade him, and asks him to become emperor. She is sure that he has both the knowledge and the abilities to take the throne. But he again refuses and loudly declares that he will never become emperor. Hercules, covered in sweat, confesses that he dreams of traveling when he grows up. So, for now, he is simply gathering knowledge, not wanting to become a servant of this country. He already strictly demands that she come down, and firmly declares, the emperor will not be able to take away his freedom. She wonders if this really means he doesn't want to be with her. Hercules ponders her words and looks at her with slight surprise. Carolina confessed that she truly loves and wants to protect the country that her father, Emperor Hadrian, once ruled. She has also long dreamed of seeing with her own eyes the new Lemurian empire that Hercules created. She wept bitterly, confessing that she dreamed of seeing Hercules become emperor. He suddenly jumps up in fright and in a panic asks why she is crying. She tries to say something through her sobs, and Hercules pulls himself together, swallowing back tears. He modestly informs her that he will take Caroline with him on the trip. She calms down a little and asks if it is really true. He gently runs his hand over her head and assures her, yes, it is true, and he is ready to do anything for her. She asks if he will let her read a book about martial arts that her mother has forbidden her to pick up. He readily agrees and tells her to read it. Then she asks if he will come to have tea with her. The guy hastily replies that he will definitely come. Then she asks one more thing. Will he become emperor? And he, without thinking, answers that yes, he will become emperor. Silence falls. Hercules looks at her intently and she looks at him, waiting for his reaction. There are no tears on her face. She suddenly grabs him by the skin and pulls him along, and he screams, sprawled on the ground, not understanding what is happening. Carolina turns around and says that a true warrior must use any weapon to win. That is what Hercules' father used to say. He sadly pronounces her name, and then, filled with horror, shouts to the entire forest that she has betrayed him. So, in front of his numerous subjects, he safely ascended the throne and became emperor. Hercules sat on the throne, tearing the crown from his head in annoyance, and grumbling that it was unbearable to live in such a country. He muses aloud about the constant trade deficit, and how their lands are steadily shrinking due to the invasion of other races. Because of this, the state is gradually losing its position and viability. He cannot understand how his father could die while ruling such a country. With despair, he notes that his freedom lasted so short, and now the life of an emperor has begun. Suddenly, a dark hand, as if formed from clouds, appears behind him, and following it, The silhouette of a woman with long hair appears in the air, seemingly floating above the ground. She assures him that she has already told him about his destiny to become emperor. She shared with him a lot of knowledge about the other world, and now sincerely hopes that he will succeed. Yes, that's right. He has a lot of knowledge about another world, but this knowledge did not originally belong to him. Its true owner was born and raised on planet Earth, in a country called Japan. I think his name is Sarari Ishichi. In short, he was able to overcome all the difficulties that had arisen up to this point, only thanks to the knowledge he brought from another world. This strange demoness is to blame for all of this. Bloodstains are visible on her clothes. Her long dark hair falls to her shoulders and a wide, frightening smile is frozen on her face. He asks her if she even remembers how long she had been suffering from headaches because of this. In another life, he was so dull and naive, almost stupid. But no matter what, knowledge always comes in handy. The demonic woman, with hope in her voice, tells him that she has great hopes for him, calls him a future great hero, and disappears, leaving him with these words. Hercules, unable to bear the tension, begins to scream that he is overcome with the desire to give up everything. Another man enters the room and, sighing, says that Hercules does not look at all like the man who has just ascended the throne. This is Christopher Augustus, Hercules' uncle. Hercules suspiciously asks if the man is really related to him. Although the man doesn't look like any of his family, he still sticks out his index finger and asks sternly. He was the one who suggested the idea to his father, after all. Hercules confesses to his uncle that although he had 2 other brothers, he valued him above all others. However, now he calls his uncle the one who stands in his way. Hercules thoughtfully adds that he does not remember any special events between them, but Adrian always talked a lot about him. The uncle says that Hercules started talking at the age of 2, and at the age of 3 he could read and write. At the age of 4 he read all the books in the castle, but even that wasn't enough for him. But Hercules got tired of these stories. He covered his ears and asked his uncle to shut up. In addition, my uncle learned that he had invented the Senba Koki, a device that greatly improved the efficiency of wheat harvesting, and from then on their wheat harvest began to grow steadily. Uncle says with a smile that both the people and the former emperor were satisfied. He believes that his ascension to the throne was the right choice. Hercules sighs heavily and says dreamily, if only they would dare to oppose him. At this moment, a subordinate runs up and, seized with panic, turns to the imperial majesty. Uncle jokes with a smile that a man has just appeared who will turn everything upside down here. Hercules replies that you couldn't think of a worse time for this. This man is Galphus Galanos, Carolina's father. He apologizes to Hercules and says that from now on they need to discuss all matters related to the management of the empire together. Hercules covers his ears from the commotion and jokingly remarks that now he knows exactly from whom Carolina inherited her character. A young man suddenly appears behind him and tells him not to speak like that, because Gelphus always behaves like that. It's Lucanos Lucalios, the leader of New Lemuria. Hercules asks Lucanos if he has been here all this time and admits that he feels terrible. Hercules says that his maternal relative, a soldier, and another person from their unit are in this room right now, and he himself is a 12-year-old emperor. Hercules stands up and says that this country cannot be saved. He takes the crown off his head and hands it to them, saying that they should continue playing their political games, while he will just have fun in the library, while everything around him goes haywire. Smiling sheepishly, Lucano says that it seems there is nothing they can do, and they will have to rely on Lady Carolina again. And a little later, Hercules looks dreamily out the window, thinking about being born into a terrible world, only to become the ruler of a doomed country. He remembers the faces of his people, asking him to save their country. The hum of voices begging for help echoes in his memory. He closes the book and, addressing them, says that only they can give him true peace and experience true spiritual rest. He says out loud that a wealth of knowledge awaits him outside this castle, but only these people help him understand his true nature. He smiles and says that books are his best friends, helping him escape from the narrow world. He opens another book, hoping to find out what world it will take him to this time. But suddenly Carolyn comes around the corner and calls him a scoundrel. Hercules is so scared that he yells at the entire library. He asks uncertainly what happened, and she replies with a smile on her face that he's stuck here again. She shouts that she heard him. He's shirking his work again. Hercules notes with resentment that Carolina has been told everything again. Hercules remarks that there are so many people here that he doesn't need to get involved in politics. He reminds her that he doesn't force anyone, and he admits that simply holding the title of emperor is enough for him. Carolina looked down at him and asked with slight contempt if he knew anything about politics at all. He got angry and asked what she had just said. Caroline turned away and quietly added that it was a real disappointment, as even Adrian had admitted it. She leaves, and sadly remarks that it's a shame. She sincerely believed that Hercules would be able to solve all the country's financial problems in one fell swoop. She says that she must have been mistaken. After all, Hercules is only 12 years old. Hearing these words, Hercules' ear twitches. She keeps telling him what his father would think if he heard. Hercules stands up and asks if she really thinks he's still a child. She turns to him, and he laughs and says that of course he knows about politics. Then he asks, "How much do you think I know about this world?" Hercules irritably assures him that it will be very easy for him to deal with this, if only he fully understands what is going on. Carolina asks if he can't do it now. Hercules is even more angry, and then he declares, if she insists, he promises to improve the financial situation of the empire in 3 years. Carolina looks at him happily, and he puts forward one condition. If he really manages to solve all the problems, then she must fulfill one of his wishes. At first, Carolina thought about it, then agreed, promising to fulfill any of his requests. He smiles with pleasure, glad that she agreed. This is a story about the difficult journey of the young Emperor Hercules, who, thanks to his knowledge, conquered 3 continents and became the master of divine light. New Lemuria has changed a lot. Now everyone knows it as the city where 2/3 of all the wealth in the world is concentrated. The empire amassed enormous wealth through the transportation of goods through its lands. Its prosperity rested on transit trade, which flourished due to the advantageous location of the state. However, such transit trade has 2 drawbacks. The first is related to the political situation and economic conditions of import and export in the destination country. And secondly, in such a situation, all the wealth will inevitably flow to the neighboring state. Namely, the Fur Kingdom will become the main enemy of the largest empire. Hercules stands in front of a huge bookcase, carefully examines the shelves, chooses one of the books, opens it and reads enthusiastically. After turning the pages, he closes the book, thinks about what he has read, and draws important conclusions for himself. He says this means, the Lemurian Empire must now find another source of income that does not depend on transit trade. Everyone in power began to rejoice and enthusiastically tell Hercules that he had finally truly gained real motivation. Hercules snorts angrily, but still doesn't deny anything. Everyone around him looks at each other in shock because they didn't even know that something like this could happen to him. Uncle happily announces that he has finally made a decision and is now the real emperor. The believer confidently shares his plans, saying that thanks to this, they will be able to save the Lemurian Empire from destruction. Hercules looks at them wearily and notes that he has not done anything yet. The father praises his daughter and gently strokes her head, saying that she is doing well. She is happy too and quietly agrees with him. At this time, Hercules looks at them angrily. He recalls how he promised to make the Lemurian Empire better in just 3 years. Now he realizes how stupid he was, but there's nothing he can do about it. Beads of sweat run down his face, and at the same time a blush fills his cheeks. A girl approaches him and asks if it's crazy to dream of improving your financial situation in 3 years. Hercules touches the book and confidently assures him that it's quite possible. That's how he started. At first, he cautiously exported goods. He says that in addition to wheat, which is the empire's staple food, grapes and olives are also grown here. These fruits are used to produce wine and olive oil, the empire's main export products. These are the main export goods and the main financial resources of the empire. He says that all countries in the world produce these goods, and that the craft industry in the First Kingdom is no worse developed than in the Lemurian Empire. Due to the high competition with them, they make almost no profit. He says this is needed to finally begin to restore their financial stability. He has set his mind on creating a special product for Lemuria. Everyone listens to his ideas with interest. When the maid approaches, everyone turns to her. She holds cups and a teapot in her hands. She pours tea into each cup in turn and carefully serves it to the guests. Everyone stares intently at the drink because it is black and no one dares to try it. Hercules calmly takes a sip and urges everyone not to hold back. After all, he has just been created. They want to object and say something to Aymar. Hercules, with a smile, encourages them not to hesitate and try. Everyone took a cup. One of them loudly noticed that the drink had a strange smell. Before that, everyone had been sniffing the contents of their cup with suspicion. Everyone takes a sip at the same time, maintaining a calm appearance, but the man next to Carolina winces at the taste and says it's disgusting. And the priestess, smiling, admits that she actually likes the drink and that it surprisingly lifts her spirits. Carolina turns to her interlocutor and asks, "Is this some kind of medicine?" She complains that it is too bitter for her. Hercules replies that he understands her. He takes the cup from Caroline and suggests trying a different method. He carefully adds milk to the drink and stirs it thoroughly. When the camera is pulled back, Carolina looks more closely and notices a pattern on the surface of the drinks. A cat's face has been skillfully drawn from the cream. She rejoices next to the cat. Hercules tells the others that he mixed it in their mugs, so he suggests they try again. They try it again together, and suddenly their faces begin to shine with unexpected joy. The friends say that it is much easier to drink the drink now, but the priestess admits that she liked the previous version better. Carolina happily returns to everyone and says it's delicious. Hercules smiles, points to the cup and announces, "It's coffee." They don't understand what kind of coffee it is. Carolina turns to her father and asks if he knows anything about it. Her father honestly replies that he doesn't know about it. He has never heard of anything like it. Hercules carefully wipes the foam from Caroline's lips with his finger and tells her that he first learned about this drink on a train a few years ago. He was told that it was grown at the church so that the ministers could stay cheerful for a long time. He says that there are few water sources in this country, and that the water that can still be found is almost unfit for drinking. That is why in Lemuria people usually drink grape wine and another drink that can be stored for a long time. But if you drink it like that, you can easily get drunk. That's why rich aristocrats drink tea brought from the East. However, even tea remains quite expensive due to the complicated and expensive import. Coffee has no established methods of cultivation, and most importantly, it can be cultivated in the climate and soils of Lemuria. So it was only logical that if it were presented as a special product of the empire, it would certainly attract attention. Everyone around falls silent. The priestess just nods silently, letting it be known that everything is clear to her. Hercules' uncle also speaks up. He understands everything and agrees that this coffee should be sold as a special product. He turns to him with ostentatious pleasure, but there is indifference in his voice. He says that he is not at all impressed, asks with indignation what this is all supposed to mean, and makes it clear he does not understand anything. He says that just to demonstrate this drink, he specially purchased a tea set from one of the silk countries of the East. White porcelain, which is actually made only in these mysterious silk lands, is not so easy to find. It is very expensive, and he knows it well. Hercules raises the bowl and calmly says that this porcelain creation was also created in the mysterious Lemuria. Everyone around looks at Hercules in amazement and carefully examines the bowls. The priest assures him that this is impossible. Isn't such white porcelain made only in the silk country in the East? Even the most powerful kingdoms don't have such technology, let alone marry. Hercules listens calmly to her and slowly sips his coffee. Hercules explained that it was real bone china, made in London in the 18th century. They didn't understand what London was, but Hercules ignored it and continued. The white color of this porcelain is obtained from ground animal bones. Hercules always speaks his mind. Up until now, all the porcelain they had been making was black, so he decided to try making it white. It was still just an experiment, but the white color looked incredibly beautiful. Uncle Hercules, overcome with strong emotions, jumped up and exclaimed that something truly incredible was happening. Uncle took a mug of coffee and said thoughtfully that for a long time he had considered Lemuria a stagnant country, but now it had dawned on him that such sophisticated technology existed there. Father Carolyn added with surprise that he had never imagined that they would be shown something so amazing and so unexpected. At that moment, Hercules thought that he had to pay a considerable sum to the master who made this porcelain, all so that the master could finish the work as quickly as possible, because Hercules was in a hurry to leave the palace. He points out to his subordinates that, despite all his efforts, the porcelain is still far from perfect, and there is still very little coffee to sell. On the table, on a napkin, there is only a handful of coffee beans. Hercules explains that he must first raise money and find craftsmen who can make porcelain. He plans to sell the products to aristocrats and merchants first. The set consists of 2 parts, bone china and coffee. Hercules smiles confidently and announces that coffee and porcelain will become special goods of the empire. Everyone around him happily supports this idea, agreeing with him. Carolina says that this has given them hope of improving their financial situation a little. Her father enthusiastically suggests that they start selling them now. Hercules listens to them carefully and mentally remarks, "Until they establish a monopoly on these goods, porcelain and coffee will never be able to influence the general state of affairs. But even if they manage to do this, the empire's financial situation will improve in at least 5 years. He is well aware that he has to achieve this in just 3 years. He goes to the window, looks at the sky, and says that now all that remains is to deal with the administrative paperwork. In the castle, he looks through a whole bunch of books, then sits down at the blackboard and starts drawing something with a ruler. He draws everything, pondering wearily, and cheers himself up with his own coffee. It's been 3 months since he started digging through administrative documents, and he finally managed to figure out what the problem was. Books, scrolls, and documents are scattered around. He examines the chart carefully and notes that, as predicted, the main reasons for the economic slowdown are rising military spending, worsening conditions, and declining tax efficiency. Soon he gathered everyone around a round table for negotiations. Hercules reported that everything was ready and suggested that they finally begin. He apologizes for the unexpected meeting, but believes that the time has come to act urgently. Something needs to be done against the Empire right now. All the employees sit there, not understanding what is happening. But is this really normal? After all, he is only 12 years old. At this time, Hercules calmly drinks his coffee, and Carolina angrily looks at everyone who voices their dissatisfaction with him. Hercules announced that it was time to begin, then noticed a boy nearby and turned to him, saying that he hadn't seen him here before. The boy nervously introduced himself. His name was Crowell, and he would be in charge of all the notes today. Hercules smiles and asks Kroll to tell him about their tax system. Kroll listens attentively to the question and begins to explain. He explains that the imperial tax system consisted of 6 main types of taxes: land tax, poll tax, trade tax, import tax, military tax, and discharge tax. He then concludes that they have a monopoly on salt. Hercules thanks him and remarks that he is doing well. May he continue to do so. The cruel one continues to stand, convulsively thinking about the praise he has received. Meanwhile, Hercules begins to summarize everything he has just heard about tax systems. Hercules argues that the poll tax, trade tax, import duty, tax on the release of servants, and the salt monopoly should be abolished or revised. At first, everyone freezes with frozen emotions on their faces, trying to comprehend what they have heard. And in a moment they start shouting at each other, confusedly asking how they will collect taxes now if they are abolished. Then Hercules calls on everyone to calm down and assures that he will explain everything now. First, he talked about the poll tax. Uncle Handsome explained that it was a list with data on all the inhabitants of the empire from whom the poll tax was collected. Prosperous turns to Kroll, asking him to evaluate what he saw and share his opinion. Seeing this, the crow noticed that there were too many women here. At this, Hercules shouted, saying that this was not all. There were too many people with disabilities here. He says that the per capita tax in this empire is much higher for men than for women, and even lower for people with physical disabilities. This is done using simple paper reports. A family of 4 men and 2 women can easily reduce their tax burden by simply indicating on the report that the family consists of 2 men and 4 women. One of the people standing there stands up and says that there are 10 million people in this country. It is simply impossible to check them all. Hercules himself agrees with him, recognizing this opinion as correct. He explains this by saying that horses can't check it, so people started to attribute bad eyesight or hearing to themselves in order to avoid taxes by any means. And they succeed. Hercules addresses all the politicians and directly asks if they can confidently state that this information is true. Their faces instantly show confusion and fear. Everyone begins to panic. Hercules calmly sips his coffee and says that he doesn't need a tax system that is unable to collect taxes properly, so such a system should be abolished. Everyone freezes in silence and looks at each other warily. Crow watches this and is surprised. These noisy bureaucrats, who were silent a moment ago, can now not utter a word. Hercules turns to Kroll and apologizes that this is not the first time he has asked this question. However, he again asks for an explanation of how the sales tax is collected. He then clarifies that the tax rate for a merchant is determined depending on his income and the type of goods. Hercules asks Kroll how he will know the exact amount of profit from sales. Kroll replies that he will simply say it in words. Hercules exclaims again that that's the thing. You can just lie here too. Poor Kroll is barely holding on. Hercules says that merchants are free to falsify figures. But in fact, taxes on trade bring considerable revenue to the treasury. Everything they earn they must pay to the state as their duty. Hercules explained that this is why they are not going to change their trade taxation policy, but given the cost of labor, time, and people, they cannot afford an unexpected audit. This idea needs to be carefully considered again. Hercules goes further and carefully reads the list of taxes. He sees that the duty on the import of goods only hinders free trade and brings a meager profit to the state treasury. Then there is also a tax on the release of servants, although in his time servants had long since ceased to have such privileges. Hercules is surprised. Why still keep these outdated and meaningless taxes? Hercules assures that both taxes will be abolished. Crowl, meanwhile, recalls how 4 tax systems have already been either completely abolished or sent for revision almost instantly. Hercules looks through the list, and finally they come to the point about the salt monopoly. In an instant, everyone around them tenses up. Hercules says that this policy, introduced during the reign of the late Emperor Hadrian, helped the empire gain a new source of income, and what the empire failed to collect through poll tax, it compensated for with profits from the sale of salt, setting its price 30 times higher than usual. Hercules said that salt was indispensable to people, so they bought it no matter the price. But it was here that he came across an interesting fact. Then a priest comes up from behind carrying a bag on a tray. All the rich people look at it with horror and panic, because they already understand what is in it. Crow looks at it and cannot understand what it is. Hercules calls Carolina to him and asks her to taste it. She tastes it, and when Hercules asks, she replies that it is ordinary salt. The girl believes that this salt is even better and cheaper than the one sold by the monopoly. Hercules says that this smuggled salt is much better than the one sold by the imperial monopoly. Moreover, it can be found on every table in the empire, and it is very inexpensive. He says that the fact that this salt is being sold right on the streets means that someone is quietly pulling the strings behind his back. All politicians hide their true faces and cover their eyes. Hercules addresses all the men, and in a threatening tone asks if they are making fun of his father's tax system. There is tension in the air. Everyone is gripped by fear. Everyone begins to sweat nervously and shyly lowers their gazes. At this moment, Carolina's father decisively draws his sword. Meanwhile, Hercules addresses the audience with a question. Does everyone here buy salt, which only the empire sells? Krull is panicked and can't understand why the officials are reacting this way. The only thought that comes to mind is, are they really all buying smuggled salt? The room falls into an oppressive silence. Hercules smiles broadly and apologizes to everyone. Immediately, everyone looks up and looks at him in surprise and confusion. Hercules says that it is quite obvious that this system is unstable and bad in every way, because it was invented only to compensate for the imperfection of the tax system. Therefore, they decided to abolish it too. Everyone present looks at him in shock, as if frozen in horror. Hercules adds that he is also willing to quietly turn a blind eye to the smuggling salt case. Everyone immediately listens to him with interest and visibly tenses. Hercules adds that all this will happen only on one condition. Everyone begins to wonder aloud what that condition might be. Hercules advises the merchant to form a union. Everyone looks at him in surprise, and Kroll becomes lost in thought. Hercules says that when merchants use familiar methods, they can easily fake their income, and it is almost impossible to understand what exactly they are doing. If they had formed a union, the number of people checking the profits would have been significantly reduced. They would have been able to organize mutual control both between the unions themselves and the traders, and between the different unions. Thus the government, together with the unions, would have been able to partially restore order to the economy and gain some control. Someone notes that there are concerns that if a union is formed, it might lead to higher prices. If a union sets the price of a product, doesn't it seem to him that others will also want to raise their prices in order to make more profit? It is said that many people here consider trade a disgusting business. They say that money is made here not by simple buying and selling, but by long deliberation and cunning. This is terribly indignant to Hercules. He cannot even imagine how anyone can earn a living like this. Hercules says that if there are few buyers, you should simply unite the merchants and think together how best to sell the goods. If you just suddenly raise the price of something, then no one will buy it, and the goods will simply spoil. He added that everyone knew that the merchants had created their own union, albeit an unofficial one, so he suggested using this to their advantage. He addresses them as if they were respected gentlemen, snaps his fingers, and announces that he has invented a new tax system to which each of them must contribute their share. My uncle hands out flyers to everyone. Hercules explains that there are no emperors or officials here now. There is only a group of people who sincerely want to restore the Lemurian Empire and can actually do it. Hercules encourages everyone not to hesitate and boldly question his decision. But, despite his words, everyone carefully reads the documents and responds only with silence. Hercules sees their reaction and says that he really thinks they are getting paid too little. So if they can successfully implement financial reforms, he will personally make sure their salaries are fair. Hercules smiles and suggests that everyone join forces and try together. Everyone immediately becomes animated, saying they have questions and topics they would like to discuss. They are interested in getting into the details and understanding what inspires them. Thus, a heated argument broke out in the meeting room, which lasted for 3 whole days and nights. And in the end, after many improvements and changes, it was finally possible to create a new tax system, which was announced for the entire empire. 2 years have passed since the introduction of the new tax system. During this time, the empire's tax revenues have increased by almost 1.5 times compared to what they were before. The use of taxes, including the cost of maintaining the imperial palace staff, was revised to reduce the burden on the state budget. Also, all treasures belonging to the imperial household that had no historical value were uniformly sold. Thus, the treasury of the Lemurian Empire gradually began to recover, and the new Emperor Hercules, who was only 14 years old, had already managed to secure the strong support of the merchants who took care of the national trade and supply. Caroline enthusiastically says that this is wonderful. She sincerely believes that he will be able to solve the empire's financial problems in less than 3 years. Hercules proudly declares that he knows all this, so he asks why she doesn't pat him on the head. She smiles, extends her hand to him and readily agrees, and then he blushes sharply, turns away, and becomes visibly nervous. She turns to him and asks if he really wants to go into town. If they go to such a crowded place, it will certainly attract attention and cause a real commotion. Hercules replies that it's okay, because to Carolina he's still the same Hercules he's always been. But to the rest of the world, he's not the person they think he is. Carolina turns to him and asks if he's used some kind of magic. She replies that she always makes reservations in advance anyway. She then asks if he is planning to leave the castle, disguised with magic, and avoid his official duties. To this he reassures her that Christopher and the team will take care of everything. He extends his hand to her, and says that today he wants to show Carolina 4 of Lemuria's landmarks. She looks at him in surprise and blushes shyly. They arrive at the museum, and Hercules reveals that this is the place he wanted to show her first. Carolina looks around in surprise and says that there are so many artistic things here. She asks what kind of place this is. Hercules proudly replies that he created all of it himself. Carolina is simply shocked by what she hears. He asks if she remembers the moment they opened the warehouse during a financial audit. He says that he was going to sell some of the surplus artwork to replenish the treasury. But among these things were many real treasures of great historical value, and some of them would be too bad to sell at all. He believes that if he had dared to do so, he would probably have been cursed. He says there were so many of them that they decided to put them on display here. She listens attentively to him and looks around. She stops at one of the items and asks if this thing was ever actually stored in the national warehouse. Hercules replied that this territory belonged to one of the aristocrats and was his private property. Initially, only artistic values from the castle itself were to be exhibited here, but the aristocrats insisted. They wanted to show off their wealth as well. Prosperous smiles and says they will charge people for their space. Everyone who wants to enter will have to pay an entrance fee. Yes, he says, they will be able to make good money. Hercules sees no reaction from Carolina. This infuriates him. He stares at her, thinking that this is not the response he expected at all. Suddenly, a female devil appears and agrees. She says that everything is fine, because women are not interested in men's boasting. Hercules sternly demands that she stop appearing so unexpectedly. She shrugs in response. She says that she is only giving him friendly advice. She says that Carolina can think like everyone else. But it seems that Carolina is not yet old enough to truly love art. She asks if they should use something simpler. Hercules listens attentively and begins to consider other possibilities. Prosperous decides to move on. He says that the next stop will be a street market, where he has often visited before. Everyone is working hard. Some are selling bread, others are washing clothes, some are separating the wheat from the chaff. Carolina comes closer and says with surprise that it is so lively and bustling here. She has never been to such a place before. Hercules says that ever since Lemuria was the capital of 2/3 of the world's wealth, there have always been a wide variety of goods on local shelves. In fact, since they had nothing to attract people, they decided to build the museum right next to the market. But on the other hand, this is exactly what attracts people, who, having visited the museum, will certainly also go to the market to buy various goods there. He tells her that there are craftsmen who can make a souvenir with her name and date, even if it's not a real coin. Carolina is genuinely surprised and happy at this news. She approaches and remarks that Hercules is the reason this place is so lively, and he agrees. Hercules picks something up, hands it to her, and asks, "How about this?" Caroline looks closely at the beads in his hand. Hercules says out loud that Carolina's eyes are like rubies, but in reality they are even more beautiful. She blushes slightly and says that he is just flattering her. Then the guy adds, "If she likes something, let her tell me. He will be happy to buy it for her." Carolina refuses, explaining that this is too much. She embarrassedly admits that she doesn't need it at all. From the moment she was born into the Gallianos family, her life was dedicated to a specific purpose. Her father, an experienced soldier, taught her exclusively the art of combat, also that she could protect Hercules. She smiles and says she's sure none of those beads would suit her, even if he gave her one of them. Hercules asks if this means she doesn't want the emperor's reward. An awkward silence falls between them. She, a little confused, exclaims that that's not what she meant at all. Hercules just laughs in response and asks why she doesn't just accept it, since he sincerely wants to give her this gift. He says that Carolina is very beautiful. Anything would suit her. These words make her even more embarrassed and blush. She turns away and asks him not to tease her anymore. He just smiles in response, thinking with pride that this is exactly what he wanted. Caroline returns to the table where the jewelry is, and her gaze stops at a necklace with a large dark stone. Hercules notices her reaction and asks if she liked anything. She quickly turns away and replies that she doesn't. She doesn't like anything here, after which she leaves. Hercules reasons that, given the way things are going, it's hardly worth showing an aqueduct in progress. It's a bridge with a canal that carries water across a ravine or river. He thinks and realizes what he needs to do next. They watch the horse races, admiring the speed of the horses. On Carolina's face is a sincere, childish joy. She watches the chariot races with admiration. In fact, she has long wanted to visit here. Hercules admits that he simply felt that Carolina might like something like that. She happily agrees, because, in her opinion, such spectacles are to everyone's liking. She says that chariot racing is a true test of trust between a rider and his horse, where horses compete with each other and people compete with people, all in a fierce pursuit of speed. Carolina confidently states, there is no one who could not enjoy it. She enthusiastically says that the red comet, Chanotus quadriga, looks particularly cool. He is a very popular jockey who has won many races since his debut, Hercules. To this, Hercules briefly replies that he understands. In the end, all the heroes of the race say goodbye to the spectators. Carolina sighs and says that today's race is over. Suddenly, all the musicians start playing their trumpets loudly. She turns her head and sees her father raise the handkerchief high up, then solemnly lower it back down. Suddenly, people on horseback burst into the arena again, charging at breakneck speed. Carolina freezes, watching the spectacle in complete shock. She doesn't understand at all what's happening. Everyone suddenly decided to hold 2 races at once. From the very beginning, the girl was sure that there should be only one gate. Hercules says that during the stadium renovation, they added more goals. Caroline listens to him with admiration. He says that this stadium had long faced financial difficulties and was often left without proper maintenance, so they finally decided to rebuild it according to a new design. Hercules smugly remarks that it's cheaper to rebuild from scratch than to repair. But he's interrupted by someone shouting that the enemy is right in front of him. It's Chanotus, the red comet. Hercules stands silent, and she screams in surprise. She can't believe she's seeing him with her own eyes. He thinks if only he knew a little more about his actions. He looks at the happy Carolina, and a smile appears on his face. At that moment he realizes, maybe it's even better this way. They leave the stadium, and Carolina jumps for joy, exclaiming enthusiastically that it was incredible. She still can't believe that he took the risk at the very last moment. Now, for her, the Red One has fully justified his nickname. Hercules sadly informs her that she has completely forgotten about him. During the race, she stops, bows low to him, and apologizes, sincerely saying that she is very sorry. Hercules walks past her and says he understands it's getting late, but does she want to take another walk to the last place? She agrees and follows him, asking where exactly they're going. Hercules turns to her, smiling, and replies that they will go to sea. Caroline's face immediately frowns. Hercules doesn't understand what's happening, because this place doesn't look like a classic alley for walks and romantic meetings. To his surprise, the girl replies that this is the first time she's heard of such a thing. She says that the sea is where all the waste of Lemuria goes. It's the worst place you can go. It stinks like hell. There's dirt everywhere, and it's just terribly unpleasant. Hercules realizes that in that world, these are the places people chose for dates. He smiles and assures her that everything is fine, but she stubbornly refuses. He gently pushes her, reassuring her that everything is okay. She doesn't give up and tries to resist. When they get to the sea, he tells her about it, and she cautiously opens her eyes. She looks down at the endless sea, the sun shining on it. The sight captivates her, and she cannot look away. She looks around and is amazed. There is no garbage at all, and the water is so clean and has no unpleasant smell at all. Previously, the harbor was full of fish waste, but now everything is sparkling clean. Hercules explains that this is thanks to the law. He says that before that, all the sewage and garbage from New Lemuria was simply dumped into the sea. This made the harbor very dirty, and sometimes it even led to outbreaks of epidemics. He explains that this is why he built this building, to solve a problem that has arisen. He points to the building and immediately clarifies, it is a wastewater treatment plant. He says that thanks to this system, all of New Lemuria's wastewater passes through a series of special filters before it reaches the sea. He said that now there is a law prohibiting littering. He also announced the creation of a new position, a person who will be responsible for collecting garbage and cleaning. And to keep the area near the capital clean, he decided to get rid of all the garbage, taking it as far away from the city as possible. Carolina exclaims in surprise that she can't believe it. He put so much effort and even came up with a law to get rid of all the garbage. Is it really necessary? Hercules approaches her and calmly replies, "He really needs it." He gently pulls her close and kisses her forehead. He smiles and says that since he's going on a date with someone he likes, it would be nice if the streets were clean. She feels her cheeks start to burn and she feels hot. He reaches his hands around her neck, carefully places the necklace on her, and says that the blue stone goes well with her red hair. She is surprised to note that it is the same necklace she has seen here before. He replies that he noticed how much she liked it when he was watching her. He tells Caroline that it suits her. She pauses for a moment, then smiles broadly and thanks him. They stand together for a long time, barely moving, as if Hercules is waiting for something important. After a short pause, he says outright that he wants her to do the same. She looks at him in horror, and he explains that he wants her to kiss him on the cheek as a sign of gratitude. He says that he has put a lot of effort into his work to this day. It is thanks to his efforts and policies that this place has become so beautiful. He reminds her that she herself promised to fulfill any request he made. Hercules notices how she reacts to his words. He thought about it. He didn't want to ask too much of Caroline, of course, but wasn't it too early to ask her to kiss him? She gently presses herself against him, kisses him on the cheek, and praises him for a job well done. Hercules can't help but smile, a blush appearing on his cheeks. She moves away from him, and he thanks her. Suddenly, that impostor appears, joking that it's gotten too hot in here. Hercules sternly orders her to shut up. Carolina watches this, not understanding anything from his abrupt behavior. At this moment, someone in the castle suspiciously notes that he is not here today. Another replies that he has a date with Lady Caroline today. The uncle and the priest are surprised by what they hear. The priest says in a low, slightly sad voice that it's perfectly normal to be curious about a girl. Christopher admits in response that he feels embarrassed when she says that. The uncle says that at first Dee showed no initiative at work and often did nothing, but recently he has been working tirelessly, so the uncle believes that it is quite natural. Now Dee just wanted to take a break from everything. He looks through all the documents with anxiety and excitement and says that the war could be about to begin. In a panic, they began to tell people that something strange was happening on the Person Peninsula. There is no hard evidence at this point, but leaving things as they are is not an option. We need to take action before the situation gets out of control. We need to discuss this with everyone. The uncle said that they would go to his house first. Christopher replied that he was only in the way, and jokingly called the uncle a smart guy. They both entered the room together and politely asked if they could take up a bit of his time. The following picture appeared before them. Hercules is settled, his head resting on Carolina's lap, and is reading a book enthusiastically. Carolina asks if it might be more comfortable for him to read if he sat down. Seeing her father, Carolina was scared, and they both screamed in fear at the same time. Hercules remained completely calm and did not react to anything. After the conversation, Hercules, still sitting on Caroline's lap, asks if they really want to increase their forces. One of the interlocutors suggests starting with the fleet, while the other insists that they must first strengthen the army. They look at each other angrily. Hercules defiantly tells Carolina that these old men scare him, and she confidently replies that she is by his side and will not let him be offended. Hercules stood up and said that last year most of their growing profits were spent on state-owned enterprises. Irrigating fields, restoring military facilities, building aqueducts, developing healthcare. All of this is extremely important. If the foundation of the state is not strengthened, it will simply not be possible to build up the army. He says that the mood in society should be appropriate, but he himself planned to increase the military budget at the beginning of the year. Citizens must be ready to defend their beautiful and cozy country. Hercules admits with a smile that he thought out his every move in advance. However, this country's army is too weak and incredibly disorganized to be rebuilt. The two look at him in fear. Hercules says that despite the differences between the races, who are united by a peace treaty, they can simply ignore it and raise funds on their own, bit by bit. He understands that they need to strengthen their military forces, as their army is currently too weak. The uncle notices that despite all their words, something strange is still happening in the vicinity. Hercules directly asks if this is really the Personia Peninsula. He already guesses everything. He says that suspicious and unregistered transactions by the wheat and iron guilds have already been confirmed. In addition, buyers of shopkeepers and middlemen everywhere are noticing a strange influx of mercenaries coming to them more often. And when Hercules began to look for the reasons for all these changes, he realized that they all led to the peninsula of Personia. He says that these Persona guys are so self-righteous that he's willing to argue. They're convinced that all they have to do is put some kid on the throne and they'll destroy him right away. They don't even think about personal conflicts and think it's all a waste. Hercules leaned back on the sofa and said that it was obvious that they would be attacked sooner or later. In fact, expanding this weak army was just a waste of money. He sighs and admits how difficult it is. Carolina listens to him carefully and tells him that if the army of the Lemuria Empire becomes stronger, she promises him a reward. Hercules instantly gets to his feet, addresses Galphus and Christopher, calling them to action, and immediately organizes a strategic meeting. Christopher reflects on how easy it all seems. Galphus listens attentively and mentally notes that this is exactly the outcome he expected from his daughter. Hercules informs everyone that they have money left over after the financial reform. The Lemuria Empire's army currently numbers about 20,000 heavy cavalry and longbow archers, and has about 100 warships at its disposal. It was finally time to consider declaring war to regain lands that had been lost under the previous rule. Proculus asks Galphus how much reinforcement they still need. Galphus thoughtfully replies that he would like to say that they still have enough cavalry, but in reality he is not at ease even for them. He replies that they have at least 10,000 infantry, but if he could ask for more, he would like to get even 20,000. To this, Hercules sternly tells him not to ask for more. They cannot afford it. Galphus sits sullenly, certain that he can't save anything anymore. Hercules returns to Christopher and asks what's happening with the fleet. He replies that he is generally satisfied with the state of the naval forces, but admits that many ships are already operating at the limit of their capabilities and need to be rebuilt. So, if spending on the army is reduced, power over the seas will increase significantly. Hercules asks if this means that everything will remain as it was before. Galphus says that their fleet has not participated in naval battles for almost 20 years, and now they urgently need an army. Christopher is disturbed by this. He angrily asks what this is all about. He exclaimed that if they lost control of the sea, they would not be able to defend the imperial capital. He insisted that the fleet was now more important than anything else. But Galphus refused to support this idea and demanded that the army be strengthened. In his opinion, there was no need to worry about parasites. Hercules listens to them calmly, thinking, there is a meaning in the words of his subordinates, because the soldiers really deserve more attention and more funds. The army of the Lemuria Empire is divided into two parts. The army was commanded by Galphus and the navy by Christopher. Initially, Lemuria had a standing army of 100,000 infantry. The cavalry was supplemented by recruits or mercenaries from allied tribes. The main army was well-trained and able to adapt quickly to any battlefield, which became the driving force for the expansion of the Lemurian Empire. However, during the reign of the previous emperor, Hadrian III, the size of the army was noticeably reduced. It turned out that he had completely destroyed the infantry and formed an army consisting of heavy cavalry and archers. These troops were less maneuverable, but they proved very effective in battle. Hercules believes it was a wise decision to reorganize the army, using these warriors as a subtle replacement for cavalry. In those days, soldiers were half simple peasants, half mercenaries from the allied tribe. Although the army of Hadrian III had fighters who had barely enough equipment yesterday, they held on and did not surrender their positions. But despite all their courage, it was simply impossible to win. Hadrian III was losing people one after another. There was no chance of reinforcement or improvement, so the defeats were increasing. Money continued to be wasted on expensive horses and armor, and the Lemurian Empire soon found itself in financial trouble due to such wasteful purchases. It so happened that the state's finances found themselves in such a difficult situation, and it is because of this that Galphus and Christopher are now arguing and fighting. Carolina returns and asks, if gathering the main army is so difficult, why not hire mercenaries? Heracles thinks about it and realizes that it won't be easy with them either. Mercenaries are soldiers for whom money is the main thing, and even the Spanish Habsburgs, the owners of colonies in South America, who had made huge fortunes from powerful plantations and silver mines, completely depleted the country's budget trying to maintain a third-rate army. Because of this, and the lack of a standing army, many of them experienced betrayal and bitter experiences. Niccolò Machiavelli emphasizes that he does not support the use of foreign mercenaries, because such warriors cannot be relied on. Hercules reflects. The Tertia used to be a regular mercenary army, but now they have become a real regular army. Therefore, they are not at all like the French reinforcements who once betrayed Machiavelli. However, one can cite the example of a Swiss mercenary who served France until his death. Another example is the French national wars. Therefore, one cannot confidently assert the evil intentions of mercenaries, as Machiavelli did. Hercules reflects that Machiavelli put his mercenaries through a lot of trials. About a third of his theories about the kingdom were based on personal reasons. Machiavelli himself was not distinguished by military abilities. He starts by saying that, given the weakness of their army, hiring mercenaries would only add fuel to the fire. In his opinion, it would be better to focus on strengthening the main forces. Gelfus agrees. He says that this is the right decision, and that they will not rely on mercenaries. Gulfus notices that most of the mercenaries in the fleet can't even ride a horse, which annoys Christopher greatly. Christopher replies that their ships are very weak. The army bastards have treated them so badly that now they will have to rebuild the ship from scratch. They started cursing and shouting at each other again. Hercules threatens. If they do not stop fighting immediately, he will force them to kiss. This is what the emperor himself ordered. Everyone suddenly falls silent and quickly sits down, and Hercules smiles and says that's great, calling them obedient boys. Hercules says they're not giving up the fleet. If they lose control of it, it'll be very difficult to get it back. So he insists that the people hurry up with building ships. Christopher thanks him. He goes on to explain that it would be impossible to add another 10,000 cavalry to the army, but he could muster around 3,000 soldiers. He asks Galfus if that would be enough. Galfus ponders. It turns out that the whole trouble is due to the 30,000-strong army of junior officers from the regular troops. He asks if this is normal at all. To this he is told, if there are only 30,000 soldiers, then yes. After all, in any army there must always be a certain number of junior officers. Perkley voices his opinion, then entrusts the matter to Gulfus, who obediently agrees and replies that everything will be as he wishes. Christopher suggests dealing with those guys from Personia, and Galfus adds that there might be some problems with them. 8 years ago, the mercenaries of the Persona Corps rebelled against their master, the Emperor. They turned traitors, turning into marauders who ravaged the Persona Peninsula. They understood that the ruler was too concerned with the slow heavy cavalry and would not be able to withstand the light infantry. He was sure that the enemies would again use the same tactics as before. Carolina asks Hercules if he really means that they will invade their territory again. Hercules replies that that is not the case. In fact, according to him, their plan is something else. They want to make the young emperor suffer and steal the state's money. They themselves seem to be living in great hardship and lack of money. Hercules had heard that the farmers of the Personia Peninsula were suffering greatly from poisons. Christopher and Gulfis gradually begin to realize who they will have to deal with. Hercules quietly remarks that it seems like all of this is his doing. While someone was cleaning the castle, a beast man with ears enters the room. Seeing the woman, he growls as if sensing danger. He grabs her sharply, gripping her with icy fear, and tells her she has nothing to fear, because he is the king of this place. Elsewhere, the same man turns to a subordinate and asks how many warriors they have managed to gather. He was informed that in addition to 10,000 mercenaries, including 5,000 infantry and 5,000 crossbowmen, another 30,000 infantry and 5,000 light cavalry from various tribes had been gathered. The man hugging the girl says that together they have 45,000 soldiers. He smiles and notes that this is already a good number. At this point, Hercules reports that the commander of Persona's mercenaries is a black panther named Dalios. One of the priestesses was leisurely strolling through the castle, holding a large stack of documents in her hands. She opened the window wide, glanced out into the courtyard, and noticed Caroline and Hercules training outdoors. She says that every time she looks at them, they are fighting with all their might. Christopher Gibbs carefully reviews the documents and says that they indicate the current state of the army's formation and the progress of the development of new ships. After that, he wonders when the war will finally begin. Hercules replied that, given the influx of wheat and iron that was personally occurring, they would soon begin their migration. They had also already begun to gather warriors, so it would take them a long time to prepare for war. He says that their warriors are well trained, but they need to rebuild their ships and gather as many fighters as possible. He suggests making sure everything is carefully prepared. But after a strategic military meeting, all the warriors and masters from the fortress of Lemuria received a warning and, without wasting time, set about fulfilling their duties. In the harbor, the ships are sailing away quickly. Christopher reported that they have gathered all the galleys, and now he is carefully checking every detail. He points to the ship and notes that the sailboats are moving quite slowly, so it's worth adjusting the mast a little and trying to speed up the test. After all, in a real battle, the ship will be burdened with weapons and armor, and they need to use every opportunity to prepare as best as possible. In addition, the rovers on the right side moved much more rigidly than the others. The ship can turn around, and if it is not controlled, it can crash into allied ships. Fortunately, these shortcomings can be quickly corrected. Everyone obeys his orders. Moving to the training ground, it is immediately noticeable how lively the exercises are going on there. Everyone gets their share of blows in turn. Gelfus asks, "What is it? Are they really scared just because of this?" He is furious and shouts that they should not even dream of defending the Empire with such weak forces. After all, their enemy is the barbarians who have taken away their homeland. Are they going to continue to be afraid and retreat? He ordered everyone to imagine that he was a general of the enemy army, and to attack him as if they really wanted to kill him. He added that until they defeated him, no one would return home. Even before the war, in order to regain the lands lost to Persona, everyone put all their strength into preparation. To boost the soldiers' morale and strength, Hercules is currently training with Caroline. They fight a fierce battle. Hercules remarks that this is how a daughter of a glorious knightly family should behave. He cannot find a single flaw in her defense. In delight, he calls Caroline the Supreme Knight. Carolina swings her sword sharply. He quickly jumps back. The girl notes that she is not so easily caught off guard with such tricks. She calmly pointed her sword at him and said that a knight must always remain cool-headed. Excessive emotions could cost him his life. He smiled back and admitted that she was right, after all. She was the daughter of Gallianus Gulfas himself. And then he suddenly pushes himself off the wall and asks, "How do you like that?" In an instant, his body ignites with inner magic, and his movements become even faster and stronger thanks to the amplification. Carolina holds a sword in her hands, trying to defend herself. Her eyes are full of fear. With one powerful blow, Hercules knocks the weapon out of her hands, breaking the sword into pieces. A short, "ouch," is heard after that. Hercules smiles broadly and asks defiantly, "What are you going to do now?" At the moment of the attack, Carolina uses her innate magic, incredible speed. Suddenly she appears right in front of Hercules, and he is frightened. Without hesitation, Carolina grabs his clothes and pulls him down with force. Hercules slowly opens his eyes and groans in pain. Carolyn warns him not to relax just because he broke her sword. He smiles awkwardly and repeats several times that he's lost. Then he suggests that they end it for today, adding that he's not her equal. She screams that it's not true, and that he was great too. In her mind, she's sure he has a real talent for fencing. He replies that he can do no more than an ordinary person, and believes that he is no longer capable of becoming better. Carolina says that if Kelly uses the connection with the spirit they made a contract with, even she won't be able to resist him. Elves have 3 special talents: witchcraft, magic, and spirit art. Witchcraft is a special gift that allows you to understand the world more deeply and even change its structure. It is this talent that is highly valued in medicine, manufacturing, and during the siege of cities. It was thanks to witchcraft that they managed to build the sewage treatment plants in such a short time. While magic may seem similar to sorcery, they are actually quite different. Sorcery is not intended for combat. It requires complex calculations and special words to use, which limits its capabilities on the battlefield. Magic, on the other hand, has no such limitations and is often used during battles. However, no matter how much effort a person puts into studying or training, not everyone is able to master magic. Magic can be divided into 3 main categories. The first is hereditary magic, which a person receives at birth. For example, Caroline has had a special ability since childhood: incredible speed. Her magic enhances the speed of her movements several times, making her amazingly agile. Blood magic, which can only be obtained through lineage. The Gallianos family and their unusual weapons are in this category. Everything they touch becomes the best weapon. Even a simple fork in their hands can pierce anything. Hereditary magic is a special type of witchcraft that is passed down from one person to another by inheritance. A striking example of such magic is the magical power of the Emperor, which was passed down from generation to generation to the rulers of Lemuria and was the main sign of a true heir to the throne. This gives Hercules a psychological advantage over other elves, which is very important when he discusses financial reforms with aristocrats. And finally, the art of spirituality. With this technique, you can make deals with spirits and receive their help. Spirits personify the power and will of nature, and through the conclusion of a special contract, a person can use their power in the art of spiritual practices. Anyone who has made a pact with a spirit is capable of this, so it has many advantages. In rural areas, spirits who can predict the weather are often found. This is a contract between the parties, so the spirit's work must be paid for. The downside is that every time he uses the spirit's power, he has to pay him back. His contract states that the source of his magical power is a condition. Hercules answers Caroline's question by explaining that his spirit is unlikely to be of much help in battle. He smiles and asks if it really matters. He is relieved that Caroline is not hurt. She wants to deny something. Then Hercules smiles at her and suggests they go back to the room. And before Tim can ask for help, she reaches out her hand, and suddenly Hercules abruptly pulls her toward him. She falls towards him, and he happily notes that she has let her guard down. She instantly panics and tries to escape. She says she thought their training was over. He asks her what happened. Her cheeks are so flushed. He asks her if now is the time to use incredible speed. She replies that in her current position, if she uses this technique, he will simply fly away, and that is definitely not what he wants. Hercules asks if she's trying to stay calm. He groans theatrically and remarks that his arms seem tired from training. Suddenly he starts to stagger and fall. She asks him to stop, saying it's unfair. Hercules smiles, thinking about how easily she gets embarrassed. He runs his hand gently over Caroline's head, pushing her bangs back from her forehead. She closes her eyes. Her cheeks become even redder and her lips tremble timidly. Hercules watches her in amazement. He notices that she has the same pendant around her neck that he once gave her. He is overcome with emotion, as she still wears this memento. He cautiously reaches for her hands and, holding them in his palms, tries to touch her lips. At this moment, he hears the priest speak of carefree youth. Hercules angrily asks her what she wants, but she only smiles, laughs, and jokingly apologizes. Then he tells her that Titus is calling for him. Titus, the brother of Hercules, sits in his workshop and constantly complains about all sorts of difficulties that have befallen him. He angrily holds up the sculpture and indignantly says that he has been waiting for his younger brother for 10 minutes. He mockingly asks if he shouldn't have a little more respect for his older brother. Titus turns to Hercules and says he knows it's hard for him to focus on his work when he's waiting. Titus admits that while he's creating true masterpieces, people like Hercules, who don't make a living from art, only do things like flirt with girls. He exclaims indignantly that it is a great mistake if Hercules thinks that he acts the same as everyone else. Hercules covers his ears with his hands and blames everything on Titus. Hercules informs him that he already has the best spot reserved for his next exhibition. Titus immediately becomes alert, his ears twitching involuntarily. Titus instantly calms down, looks at the man with admiration, and says that he is faced with an extremely powerful person, a real miracle. In addition, he calls him his dear younger brother. Meanwhile, Hercules thinks to himself, are there really such simpletons in the world? Titus invites Hercules to sit down while he makes coffee. Hercules obediently goes to the chair, but Titus stops him and asks him not to sit on that particular chair, because it is special, and he is unlikely to understand why. He tells me that it is called the cursed chair. It was once the favorite of a man who was executed for serial murder. As soon as someone sits on it, the restless spirit of that murderer will immediately kill the daredevil. At least, that is the story he told Titus. Titus proudly says that over 50 people have died because of this chair, because it is truly terrifying. Hercules wonders if it would be better to hang it from the ceiling instead of the usual collection. His interlocutor happily agrees and suggests putting it on display. Titus is the second son in the Hadrian family. He and his brother have similar views on art, and they often talk about it, even if Titus is only an amateur. Although it was the younger brother who became ruler, their relationship remained as close as before. He turns to Titus and asks how His Highness Hadrian is doing. Titus replies that he still doesn't appear among the people. It seems that he is having a hard time accepting that the crown didn't go to him. Hercules asks if he can simply give him the crown. Titus replies that he would advise against it. If he simply hands over the crown, then the state will fall. Hercules turns to Titus and tells him that he doesn't need the crown. He asks him to stop joking, explaining that there is no need for it. He says that Hercules created a place for exhibitions called an art gallery museum, and also discovered coffee, a drink that gives vigor for several hours. He has no time left for empire. Titus says with enthusiasm that once he finishes the sculpture, he will have to paint a few more pictures and then make the sets for the concert next month. He is so inspired that he simply doesn't have enough hands, so he jokes that he wouldn't mind making his own copy. Hercules says that he is like some kind of huizon. He himself does not really understand who he is. Then Hercules asks to pay no attention and forget about it, because it was just his thoughts out loud. He admits that he once really wanted Adrian to take the throne, but after they parted ways, he wished him a good day, only to receive an angry look in return. Now he is sure that Adrian simply hates him. Titus admits to Hercules that he cannot handle this problem. He was his father's first son, but his upbringing was unsuccessful. He hands Herceg a cup of coffee and says that no matter how much he worries, it still won't solve the problem. Herceg has two older brothers. There was a second son named Titus, and a third named Hadrian. You may have guessed that he was named Hadrian in honor of his father. Had Hadrian become ruler, he would have been called Hadrian IV. Titus says that his father wanted to make his first child an heir. Perhaps that's why he was given that name, with the hope that his son would fulfill his father's dreams. But over time, it became clear. His father was mistaken in his ways of love. He spoiled Adrian too much, which made him selfish and distant from people. As far as Hercules remembers, he did not use his powers for good, but instead attacked and abused the children of neighboring aristocrats. Each time, his father was forced to apologize to the victims and their families, keeping the story quiet, just to preserve his son's chance to inherit the title of emperor. Titus says that he once tore his painting to pieces. Hercules assumes that there was a quarrel between them, since they are fighting now. But Titus assures him that there was no quarrel. Titus begins to tremble with anger, and confesses that he had a fight with his father, when he reprimanded him for drawing something in front of Adrian. It was then that he first heard a new word: baselessness. Hercules looks at Titus and mentally notes that he looks like a living dead man. Titus says his father is to blame for the way he grew up. He hoped it would go away with time, but it never did. 14 years ago, he attacked 4 children of noble families, and this event shook the entire empire, plunging it into a wave of anxiety. Adrian remained calm, trusting that his father would come up with something. But in the end, his father simply gave up. Titus turns to Hercules and asks if he's heard that his father was an extremely determined man. He asks if that's really true. He says that after that incident, he went up to him for the first time, looked at his scribbles, and said that Titus was no good either, and then never came back. Hercules asks if that's when he really started to hate his father. He declares that the first son is of no use. And just as with the second son, military actions take place on the battlefield, and the political situation remains unclear. And when the father found himself in a hopeless situation, another son was born. And this was Hercules. He was born at the most auspicious moment, and from his very childhood he easily coped with all difficulties. To his father he was a real miracle. And since then he has given all his love only to him, completely forgetting about Adrian. That is why he hates Hercules. Titus concludes, "That's all, a happy ending." But Hercules is indignant. What joy is there in this happiness? It all looks very suspicious. Hercules remarks that his father doesn't know how to raise children at all. Titus denies that, in fact, he doesn't. He says that he has become living proof of his father's success. He was able to avoid all the mistakes that his eldest and middle sons made. The descendants of royal families are those who were raised thanks to the bitter experience of previous generations. If the brilliant creation had appeared immediately, no one would have had to suffer, and the problem of the financial crisis would have been solved. And he has also managed to create such an important social infrastructure as a sewer cleaning service. Taking a sip of coffee, he thanks Tito and looks away. Titus asks Hercules when they will get rid of Hadrian, because no one knows when his older brother, thirsty for power, will take him and cut off his head. To this, Hercules replies that he is not going to do that. As long as he behaves quietly, he will not touch him either. He wonders why Titus is so concerned about this issue. Titus asked Hercules if he truly believed his brother would remain inactive. He also asked if there would be any difficulties if his brother decided to establish contact with the non-elven aristocracy. Hercules is silent for a moment, then confesses to Titus that he knows nothing about politics. He asks him what he thinks they are going to do next. Hercules confidently declares out loud that it is simply impossible. The uprising will not begin. All movements of goods and people are easily tracked thanks to the guilds. As for the attack, it is generally from the category of fiction. No assassin will be able to break through the security of Carolina. He smiles suspiciously and says that if he really did commit the murder, he could very easily be arrested or killed for various reasons. Titus asks, who else is worried about Hercules saying such terrible things? Hercules suddenly remembers something about Carolina. He turns to Titus and asks if he has fulfilled his old assignment. Remembering this, Hercules realizes that this is precisely the reason he called Titus. He pulls up the suitcase and places it in front of him. Curious, he opens it and smiles when he sees what's inside. He expresses admiration and says that, as one would expect, it is indeed perfect. Titus is delighted by this approval and replies that he is pleased to hear it. He then asks Hercules where he just got this amazing design from. He says he made everything exactly to the dimensions he was asked for and asks if everything is okay. Hercules replies that everything looks cool. Titus wondered if he should have handed it over to Carolina after the successful military reform, But the latter replied that he could not do so until the final outcome was clear. There was a knock on their door, and Titus opened it. Christopher and Galphus stood in front of the door, apologizing for disturbing their brothers. Galphus announced that the training of 30,000 more infantrymen and junior officers had been authorized. Christopher added that the fleet had already been rebuilt, and the maximum possible number of ships was now in service. Titus tries to understand what this all means, but then Hercules stands up and solemnly proclaims, "They will reclaim the Personia Peninsula," and from that moment on, the war officially begins. Personia's territory is located on the lands of the former Lemuria Empire. Its main income was the export of grapes, olives, and marble. However, even these revenues are clearly not enough to continue to keep about 10,000 mercenaries in service. 8 years ago, when His Highness Hercules was only 4 years old, a mercenary broke into their home. The reason was that Hercules' predecessor, His Highness Hadrian III, had stopped paying the money promised to the mercenaries according to the contract they had signed. To suppress the rebellion, he led the troops and started a war. But it was under the leadership of Dalios that the opposing army defeated him. In the end, peace was achieved, but for this he had to sacrifice the peninsula of Personia. Since then, the Personia Peninsula has become a de facto independent country, ruled by mercenaries. At this time, everyone in Personia Bay is relaxing, talking, and enjoying drinks. Someone in attendance exclaims with pleasure, "What a wonderful night it is." However, he suddenly choked on his drink when he heard sharp knocks from the street, a sign that someone was intruding. Everyone is panicked, shouting and urging each other to quickly take their places. Without wasting time, everyone must prepare immediately. They go out and look out at the open sea, and what they see terrifies them. A multitude of ships are rapidly approaching, tightly closing the entire sea before them. At this time, a brutal regime has taken hold in Persona itself. The poor residents sit in the open air in the streets, almost exhausted, begging the soldiers not to touch them. But one of Dalios' soldiers rudely and mercilessly pushes the supplicants aside. At this moment, in Adalio's castle, a beautifully laid table stands before him. On it are juicy meat, fresh rolls, and various snacks. Dalios reads the petition and realizes that he is being asked to lower taxes. He notes with sadness, "There are a lot of poor people in this country." He brazenly claims that even though he freed Lemuria from control, they still wasted all their money there. Now he insistently asks, what would they do without him anyway? He tosses the piece of paper aside and picks up the bottle again. He notes that at least the wine here is delicious and the food is much better than in Lemuria. A subordinate approaches him and reports that they have detected activity from the Lemuria Empire. It seems they are preparing for an invasion. He just smiles in response and reassures that he has known about this for a long time. When asked if he was really going to attack Lemuria, he calmly replied, "They have nothing to fear." He tells them that their enemy is just a 15-year-old boy who has never seen a real war. Moreover, he is the son of His Highness Hadrian III. He is sure that the boy is like his father in everything. He will go pray to the gods or do something similar to achieve victory. He says that, after all, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Then he asks where they got the idea to make this first war so memorable for him. Suddenly, a soldier runs into the room and, barely able to catch his breath, shouts bad news to his commander. In response, a furious Dalio grabs him by the head and slams him hard on the table. He notes with a faint smile that he was distracted when they barged in so suddenly. Now he won't be able to really enjoy his lunch. The warrior, trembling and bleeding, apologized to the commander. However, he reported that a letter had arrived with the news that the Empire's army had already invaded their land. Everyone looks at each other in shock, as if petrified with horror, and Dalios at first completely freezes in place. Suddenly he bursts into the others and asks what's going on here. The soldiers told the commander that they had decided to attack unexpectedly. The commander abruptly interrupted them, saying that he had already understood that. It would be better if they told him where exactly the attack had started. He is told that it all started with the bay. The Bay of Personia was the first to be struck by the army of the Lemurian Empire. Dalios begins to tremble with rage. He sighs heavily and, with bitterness in his voice, says that everything is obvious to him. He considers Hercules to be a real rat. He realizes what he knew. Personia had no ships, so the preparations for a land attack had failed. If they had had even one ship, they could have held off the enemy until their own troops could land. His subordinates remind him that the soldier must be called immediately. But he interrupts again sharply, saying that he knows it perfectly well. He says that if they are now in Personia Bay, then they have only two options. Either go to the fortress where he is, or head straight to the capital. He is now in the fortress, but they will have a long way to go, as long journeys in heavy armor only exhaust the warriors. In addition, he is more focused on strategy than Prince Adrian III himself, so it is unlikely that he will make so many reckless mistakes in the event of a surprise attack. If he really wants to stay in the black, then, according to Delio's predictions, he will definitely head to the top. He smiles and remarks that they are still acting too naively. After all, thousands of mercenary infantrymen have grown up in such conditions since childhood. And there are 2,000 archers gathered here, and on top of that, they are surrounded by a high wall. He is convinced this wall will not fall so easily. He says that we need to meet the enemy with a counterattack right in front of the walls. When they slow down the attack, it will all be over, and there will be no great damage. At this moment, the frightened soldier calls for his commander. The soldier tells us in horror that the walls of the capital have fallen. The attackers have broken through. He looks at his subordinate in shock, not believing his eyes. He asks in horror what he just said. After all, his military training is perfect. Lemuria should not have such a strong army here. He replies that all this coincided with the riots in the capital. He's worried about whether the uprising really happened at this very moment. How can this even be? Dalios wondered what could have gone wrong, and finally came to the conclusion. There were indeed traitors among them. The people on the street are panicked. They have rioted and are attacking the soldiers. People are screaming at them to flee this country. They will not let taxes drive them to their graves while others enjoy luxurious meals with their money. They are screaming to stop this pathetic resistance. They cannot allow the imperial army to continue to successfully suppress them. They need to pull themselves together and calm down. Someone shouted to another to be quiet. He said it was better to give these lands to Lemuria than to live like this. The soldiers should get out of here as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the soldiers themselves are shouting at the people, demanding that they calm down immediately. Suddenly, the unexpected happens. Someone stabs the squad captain with a sword. He is killed on the spot. The biggest shock is that it was done by one of his own soldiers. He is followed by other soldiers who plunge their swords into the commander. As soon as he dies, the same soldier, left alone, gives the order to open all the gates of the castle because the imperial army needs to enter. Hercules watches all this from afar and laughs. He is sure that this panther has just uttered the phrase that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. He asks mischievously, "So, what does it feel like when an apple squeezes its tail?" Christopher and Galfa, along with Gallienus, silently look at him, thinking. He seems very pleased with himself. Carolina Gallionis reported to His Grace Hercules that the invasion had gone surprisingly smoothly. She asked how he had managed to organize it. Hercules proudly replied that it had been as simple as possible. He makes a gesture that means money and says, "Everything is decided by this." Carolina Gallionis watches him and cannot understand if money really determines everything. He says that Dalios hired mercenaries who had grown up in such harsh conditions since childhood. They are incredibly loyal to him, so if he tried to betray or defeat them, these people would certainly take revenge. But there were still not enough loyal mercenaries to defend the cities. So Dalios decided to invite even more mercenaries from abroad. So they first lured them to their side by promising double the salary. He had understood their intentions 3 months earlier. Gulfus Gallionis looked at him and accused him. He saw a bribe-taker in front of him. He also added ironically, "Who is anyone, not to talk about loyalty to him?" Hercules only picked up the topic, saying that he had repeatedly warned, "Trusting mercenaries is more expensive than trusting yourself." And when Hercules bribed several mercenaries and sent them into the city, they helped him incite the inhabitants to revolt. Carolina Gallionis asks how they managed to pull this off, relying solely on the townspeople. Christopher replies that the people were tired of Dalios' tyranny from the beginning, and their discontent only grew with each passing day. Galfus Gallionis says that a rebellion could be brought about with the support of loyal mercenaries. However, it took a long time to lure them to his side, and now the gates are open. Hercules says that 4 months ago it became clear that this invasion was doomed to success. He approaches his comrades and confidently says, in his opinion, they are ready. Now he suggests meeting Dalios on the best battlefield. Galfus Gallionis looks at Hercules intently, waiting for his reaction. Hercules asks if he was really going to say something. Frightened, Galfus hastily brushes it off, assuring him that he had no such intention. He bows his head, is silent for a moment, and confesses. This is the first time Hercules has taken command in a war. Before this, all his orders have been impeccable. But this success is a real miracle. He thinks they had better establish themselves here and defend this advantageous position while it is still in their hands. Hercules laughs and asks if the Imperial Army General is really going to seek protection right in front of his daughter. Is he really that weak? Hercules, having managed to put the Gulf Gallionis in an awkward position, confidently declares that now they have every chance of victory. He says that 8 years ago the Personia Peninsula belonged to the Empire. Judging by what he learned from the merchants, The geography of this region has hardly changed since then. Galphus Gallienus asked if Dalios had bribed these merchants as well. Hercules just chuckled and said that he always acted very carefully. Suddenly, he holds out a scroll of paper and says it's a map of the Personia Peninsula. He came across it while dozing in the castle library. Comparing the find with the information from the merchants, he saw that almost everything matched. Pointing to the map, he says that the day after tomorrow, Dalios will attack this city to take it back. He advises to start the attack with archers, using this hill as a main point. There is a river on the other side of the hill, so only the front and rear will have to be defended. Galphus Gallion is ordered to give the soldiers time to dig trenches and prepare for defense. This should help them hold their positions, even if they are outnumbered. Hercules turns to Galphus Gallienus and asks him to calm down, assuring him that he is not at all like his father. Galphus Gallienus is very surprised by this. Hercules says that when he was only 4 years old, his father took him to the battlefield for the first time. Even then, he was wearing heavy armor. He says that after many defeats, he learned to find different ways to escape, and he often heard arguments between himself and his father. Hercules noted that Dalios was completely incapable of governing the country, but he had already won 2 victories over the empire in a row. However, he could not win alone. Hercules tells Helion of Galpha that he is willing to listen to his opinion and choose a strategy after they have discussed everything carefully. He suggests that they witness this victory together. Galphus Gallion looks at Hercules for a long time, then kneels before him and bowing his head says that he has grown a lot. But Galphus Gallienus insists. Let him win this war. He promises to give it to the honor of His Highness Hercules at any cost. Hercules says he is counting on him, calling Galphus Gallion a real firestorm. In response, he assures him that he understands everything. A little later, Hercules sits by the window, looking thoughtfully into the distance. He recalls the unexpected attack in the bay and the capture of the capital. Just as Gallienus of Gulf had predicted, everything is going according to plan, like a well-tuned mechanism. Dalios says that panic is likely to set in these days. The infantry still have 2 days to go to the city in the north. During that time, they must complete all preparations. Christopher is also stubbornly defending the bay. There are only 2 days left until the war begins. Their army, which has already doubled in size, is also about to find itself in a profit. Then a demoness approaches him, and, noticing that he is awake, asks if she can help him. He, remaining indifferent, replies that there is no need for this. At this moment, the frightened soldiers in persona feverishly prepare for defense. Dalios, sitting on horseback, urges everyone to move faster. He has decided once and for all. He will no longer allow Lemuria to control his actions. Dalios is furious, constantly repeating that Hercules underestimated him, and swears that he will definitely kill him. Pericles carefully considers what step Dalios will take next. The rule of triple attack. To overcome the enemy's defenses, the attackers need to have 3 times as many people as the defenders. This rule shows that it is easier to defend than to attack. However, the attackers have one advantage. They themselves choose the place and time of the attack, which the defenders cannot. It turns out that it is the attackers who more often take the initiative in war, because it is easier for them to choose when and where to start the battle. Percolus assures them that they will act thoughtfully. They will attack with calculation and defend with intelligence in order to be sure of victory. This is how he imagines their battle. Carolina Gallienus asks him if this means the enemy will seize the initiative. To this he replies that in fact both attackers and defenders can be the first to attack and take control of the battle. He says it is impossible to say anything for sure about them. They do not defend themselves, but they do not attack either, although he admits that they could attack at any moment. It is said that it was the actions of Dalios's rule that led to the fact that the people of the city hated him. His main weakness is that he keeps everyone in submission only through fear. When the mercenaries realize that they cannot win this war and that there is no one to wait for help from, they will abandon everything and flee into the desert. Carolina Gallienus asks him why they would do this. Isn't it easier for soldiers to stick to their leader? Hercules replies that for mercenaries, war is just a business he knows well. They cannot be so loyal to someone that they would go to war where there is no hope of victory. He gently stroked her head and said that in the end, money decides everything, so you shouldn't trust them. Hercules explains that an oath to one's homeland and a willingness to give one's life for it is not at all the same as an army of such warriors. He believes that Dalios wants to defeat him as quickly as possible and doesn't care about any disrespect to his position, so they need to irritate him a little. Here, a spirit beast with a bulging eye announces to everyone that it has discovered enemy soldiers. The soldiers from the Persona army move straight ahead. Percolus asks how many there are. The soldier replies that according to what the eye can see, the enemy has about 40,000 fighters. The soldiers began to say that the enemies had finally made themselves known. They angrily called them cursed traitors. Gulfus Galleonis raises his hand and points to something that has appeared ahead. Hercules notices a flag with a panther image and sees Dallio from afar, who is rushing straight at them at breakneck speed. It is said that Hercules' army has approximately 28,000 mercenaries on the front lines, brought from abroad. On the flanks were about 5,000 light cavalry of various nations, and behind them was a column of 4,000 well-trained infantry, supported by another group of 3,000 archers with crossbows. Hercules realizes that this information completely coincides with what the bribed mercenaries had previously reported to him. Now he sets about counting his warriors. The army included 8,000 heavy cavalry, 15,000 infantry, and another 5,000 archers with longbows, a total of 28,000 warriors. He says that all their fighters are barely a match for the enemy infantry, but they have the advantage thanks to the protection of stakes and trenches. If they simply try to cross the river directly, they will immediately be caught in a hail of arrows that will rain down on them like rain during a storm. Dalios decides to go ahead. Hercules realizes that he has little choice but to move forward. He understands. If this happens, everything will be decided by the true strength of their opponents. He calls on everyone to listen carefully and announces, "Today begins a new page in the history of Lemuria. After this battle, their empire will be reborn." He shouts that they will regain their lands and dignity. All the warriors pick up on his words, supporting him with shouts and applause. Delius looked at him with deep hatred, called him petty, and promised that he would make him regret it. He raises his sword, ordering his soldiers to attack. At the same moment, a herald informs Hercules that the enemy is advancing. Hercules ordered all his archers to prepare to shoot, then gave the command to shoot. All of them simultaneously drew their bowstrings and fired thousands of arrows at the enemy. Here the warriors immediately turn to the spirits of the wind. They ask them to hear the call and dance around among the arrows. So when the spirits create the direction of the wind, they help the arrows hit the target precisely. These arrows fly right into the soldiers' faces. Dalios laughed and said, "Is he really using the same spirits that protected him now to attack his enemies from afar?" Elves are known for their incredible archery skills. Each of them can fire 10 arrows per minute. In Dalios's eyes, there are about 5,000 archers gathered, which means that 50,000 arrows will fly at the enemy every minute. He says thoughtfully out loud that their archers are far inferior to their enemies in penetrating armor. But if 1,000 arrows simultaneously fly straight into the face or an unprotected part of the body, he quickly calculates. In a minute, it's 500 soldiers. In 2, 1,000. In 10 minutes, 5,000 soldiers could be killed or incapacitated. Even if there were no serious injuries, the situation still remained dangerous. It's enough to break even the strongest. He sees the wounded warriors turning back, each one begging for help, confessing that they don't want to die. Arrow after arrow flies straight into the enemy, piercing their eyes, and the soldiers fall dead. Dalios stands majestically, looking out from under his brow and wondering, are there really any weaklings among them who are ready to surrender? He turns to his soldiers and sharply asks what they are doing. He declares that he will not let his money go to waste. Everyone around him looks at him in horror. With trembling hands, one of the warriors reaches for his weapon, grabs it tightly, and gathering all his courage, rushes into battle again while the rest follow him. Hercules notices something approaching them and quickly realizes, no matter who tries to escape, he is convinced that even those who run will not escape death. He notes that they are holding up better than he expected, and if they continue like this, they will be able to reach the enemy archers. He turns and thinks that time has given us courage. At that moment, Hercules calls out to Gulf Gallienus. Out of the darkness, a huge Gulfus Galleonis, heavily armored, appears. He approaches and asks if it is his time to fight. Hercules confidently replies that it is his turn. He orders Gulfus Galleonis to lead a detachment of heavy cavalry and head there. Hearing these words, the soldiers nearby stop them, reminding them of the heavy armor of the horsemen. Under such conditions, it is almost impossible to overcome the moat. Everyone understands that the plan is almost impossible to implement. Gulfus Galleonis replies that he understands everything and asks if this is really so. He just nods in the affirmative. The soldiers look at each other in confusion and cannot figure out what the two are talking about. Hercules asks at what distance it is best to stand, and the man, having saddled his horse, replies that 10 meters will be enough. Hercules is surprised and asks if he is sure. He turns to His Highness Hercules, smiles and asks who he thinks he is. Then he pulls on the rope. The horse neighs. He loudly calls the others after him, ordering them to go forward and not to stop under any circumstances. He promises to show what they have achieved through their training, and to spread the song of victory throughout Lemuria. Gulfus Galleonis asks Carolina Galleonis to stay behind him to provide support from the rear. She obediently agrees and follows, keeping her distance. They shout loudly to their soldiers to step aside, as the cavalry is charging at them. Hercules stands aside, counting carefully. Galeossi's soldiers have no idea that the enemy is actually preparing to break through their trenches. Some of them scornfully remark that they are simply overestimating the strength of their horses and armor. Dalios looked closer and realized what the problem was. He started shouting to everyone to immediately withdraw the soldiers. However, the mercenaries did not understand anything and could not figure out what was happening. When Hercules' count reaches 10, he orders the spirit in the form of Modius to remove the illusion. She, a true temptress, listens to his words and releases her spell. The trenches that separated them suddenly disappear. The soldiers freeze, not believing their eyes. Galvest Galleonis informs Carolina that Hercules has lost his spirit illusion technique. She understands everything and humbly accepts his order. Carolina Galleona screams that she will tear everyone to pieces, and Galleona of Golfa picks up that she will burn enemies with just the power of her voice. One summons the spirit of Elegias, and the father summons the spirit of Amma. Carolina Galleonis suddenly accelerates and rushes past the enemy warriors. Behind her, on horseback, Galphus Galleonis flies in pursuit, flames blazing around him. The soldiers are burned to the ground. Carolina Galleonis rushes past, swinging her sword and mercilessly destroying her enemies. Meanwhile, Gulfa Galleonis and Carlina approach Dalios from different directions, preparing for a decisive battle. Hercules loudly ordered everyone to go only forward. Meanwhile, the paths of Carlina and Galphus Galleonis merged into one path. Hercules' warriors are advancing rapidly. Archers are firing arrows one after another, and Galphus Galleonis fearlessly rushes into the thick of the battle, crushing everyone who gets in his way. Carolina Helionis follows her father, confidently swinging her sword and easily clearing the last soldiers in her path. She exclaims to herself that she must only go forward. Dalios looked around and realized that they wouldn't make it in time. Who would have thought that he would be able to so skillfully disguise his attack routes with technology he himself created? He begins to doubt whether he is really the son of that fool. After all, how can a hawk be born from a snake? Dalios smiles slyly, as if he's up to something, and says it'll be fun. Then he turns to the sergeant and orders everyone to change strategy and start treating the wounded. Suddenly, all of Dalios' soldiers start to flee. Galphus Galleonis cannot understand what is happening. Hercules watches and doesn't understand why they suddenly stopped resisting and scattered in different directions. What made them do that? Hercules carefully watches everything that is happening and gradually begins to understand the essence of events. His gaze freezes in horror, and he quietly says to stop. Carolina Galleonis, seized with fear, turns to her father and shares her suspicions. It seems to her that the enemies are behaving very strangely. The father confirms that he has noticed this too and advises his daughter not to lose her vigilance. Suddenly an arrow pierces the soldier's eye. Galphus Galleonis and Carolina Galleonis turn back in horror. One by one, the soldiers begin to dismount. Everyone notices that Dalios' soldiers are already standing in front, their spears and crossbows firmly held, aimed directly at them. Hercules watches in horror, while Dalios orders the archers with crossbows to advance. Everyone starts shooting crossbows. Despite this, the soldiers move forward. The arrows hit their horses, and they fall to the ground. As soon as the soldier falls, the enemies quickly run up to him and simultaneously pierce him with their spears. Moans of terror and pain escape his lips. The other soldiers move forward anyway, but they are quickly surrounded and spears are thrust into their bodies. Dalios shouts to everyone, ordering them to attack. Hercules' soldiers remain in place and loudly declare that no one will pass. At the same time, their faces betray tension. They are holding on only by nervous strength and preparing their arrows. The enemy mercenaries instantly deal with the archers standing in front, and Carolina Galleonis panics. Gulf Galleonis only sighs. This is bad. Their troops gradually retreat back. The sergeant informs His Highness Hercules that the 1st and 3rd squads have already been defeated. The infantry is trying to keep the situation under control, but it is unlikely that they will be able to hold off the enemy for long. He asks Hercules to give the order, but Hercules only responds with silence. The sergeant turns to him in horror, but Hercules remains silent, thoughtfully concentrating. Finally, Hercules understood his plan. The enemy was going to destroy them with heavy cavalry. He began to tell how he had divided the central infantry and sent them in different directions, then sent the crossbowmen and spearmen after him. Thus he hindered the movement of their cavalry, which was already exhausted by the constant maneuvers. On top of that, they found themselves in front of a wall of real spirits, which blocked their path. Even if they managed to hold off the crossbowmen and spearmen, the enemy could bring in light cavalry to cover the phalanxes and regrouped infantry, trapping the heroes. Dalios watches him from afar and realizes, as she suspected, Hercules doesn't really have a backup plan. Hercules explains that this is how he is used to fighting. The sergeant cannot understand why Hercules would behave this way in such a difficult situation. He notices Hercules smiling, as if pleased with himself. Hercules says that's not bad, considering Dalios's plan. Hercules asks the colonel if he can take his horse. With confidence in his voice, he declares that he will be the winner of this battle. At this moment, Carlina is struggling with the spearman, breathing heavily, sweat glistening on her forehead. She is still holding on to her horse. She understands that this is bad, but she remembers. Her father relies on her. Her horse is also tired, but she is forced to find a way to defeat her enemies. At one point, the crossbowman shoots at her, and the arrow hits the horse squarely in the head. The animal flinches, cannot stand it, and eventually falls with its mistress. The enemies stood right in front of her, their spears pointed at her head. At that moment, she clearly understood that the situation was very bad. The soldiers began to ask each other how much they would be paid for the head of the enemy commander. The other is surprised and asks what he is talking about. She is just a child. However, the first one denies. Everything is not so simple, because in front of them is the daughter of the legendary Galphus Galionis, a famous fire rider. He is convinced that this night you can earn well, because such an opportunity is a real treasure. Another one of them offers to sell the girl at auction. The other agrees and, smiling, suggests going to the commander. But suddenly, Carolina Galionis jumps up in rage and with one movement blows off the soldier's head. She exclaims that for such frivolous talk about such things, she will not allow anyone like him to ruin Hercules' plans. She rushed to the attack, and behind her Hercules was already rushing forward, loudly calling to his soldiers to hurry after him. Everyone trusted him. The squad obeyed the order and rushed down the mountain with him. Dailos laughed and wondered if he had really decided to go to his death with his precious army. However, Lemuria only had about 10,000 soldiers, no more. And even if there were a few more, it wouldn't change anything. Looking closer, his face freezes, and then he is overcome with horror. In front of him is a field completely covered with soldiers. Dalios has no idea what is happening. The soldiers were frightened and started shouting that they had not expected this at all. They had not come here for this, and they clearly did not have enough money for this, so they all ran away. A huge horde of warriors rushed to attack them. Dalios calls his soldiers fools and sternly orders them to return to their positions, as this is only an illusory spirit, not a real enemy. No one pays attention to him, and Dalios screams, unable to believe that Lemuria could have so many warriors, yet his own soldiers are fleeing. He grits his teeth in anger. Dalios' sword falls from his hands, and he hangs his head in despair. Carolina Galionis looks around and notices that the enemy soldiers seem to be retreating. At that moment, Hercules addresses her, and Carolina turns at his voice. He holds out his hand and asks her to take it. She stops for a moment, looks at him, and is embarrassed. But she takes his hand anyway, and he easily lifts her up and places her next to him on the horse. She turns to him and sincerely apologizes, but he interrupts her, smiling, and says that for her first fight, she is holding her own. She raises her head and asks if she can ask something. Hercules listens intently to her words. She asks him why he hid the fact that Lemuria had so many warriors. She is sure that if they had thrown all their forces into the battle at once, the outcome of the battle would have been completely different. Hercules smiles and says that perhaps these are the mercenaries he bribed. Carolina Galionis watches the warriors closely and suddenly notices them simply disappearing from sight. At that moment, the crowd of warriors disappears, as if melting into thin air. Carolina Galliona notices that there are actually far fewer of them here, and realizes that it was all just an illusion. Suddenly, a female devil appears before Hercules and tells him that he will have to pay a price for such an illusion. Hercules just nodded in agreement and asked her to disappear as soon as possible. She just smiled mysteriously and melted into thin air, promising to come back for him later. Hercules tells Caroline that it is very difficult to destroy all 40,000 warriors one by one. But once the enemies see the illusion of victory and lose the will to fight, everything changes. He claims that after such a defeat, Dalios will no longer be able to organize a worthy defense. Everyone already knows how this battle will end. Hercules shouted to Golfa and his Galionis that it was time to retreat and ordered them to return to base. Galionis replied that he trusted Carolina and the soldier to Hercules' care. He turns to him and says he'll be a little longer. His gaze is filled with anger and bloodlust. Hercules turns away with Caroline and says that he understands him. He asks to make sure that there are no traces or rumors left, and that he does not overdo it. Gelphus Gallion replies that he understands. After that, he begins to burn with fire. The soldiers surrounded Dalios, pointing their swords at him. Thus, the first war led by Hercules, already as emperor of the Lemurian Empire, ended in his absolute victory. The Lemuria army won with almost no loss of its warriors. while Persona lost all of its mercenary infantry. After the war ends, the cleanup begins. Many people are treated, all weapons are collected, tents appear around. The soldiers can finally eat a hot meal in peace. Hercules was sitting in the great hall, intently drawing something out of a letter. Galthius Gallio approached him and announced, "He has been brought." Dalios enters the tent with his head held high. Carolina Gallionis follows him, and Gulf Gallionis waits opposite. Hercules remarked that he had thought Dalios would put up more resistance, but he remained surprisingly calm and silent. Dalios says that after such a crushing defeat, the remaining soldiers will no longer follow him. Unfortunately, they are not connected by blood or power. Dalios looks at him with admiration and addresses His Highness Hercules. He admits that he greatly underestimated his abilities, and now it is an obvious defeat. Dalios apologizes for his rudeness and asks to accept his guilt. Galfus Gallionis became angry and exclaimed indignantly, "How dare he speak so confidently if he is now tied up?" Hercules only laughed and agreed. Indeed, this time the victory was his. But if it was a direct collision in the air, he turns to Dalios and asks what he thinks about it. Dalios replies that then victory would be his. Galfus Gallionis chokes with rage, and Hercules only smiles and says that he thinks so too. Galfus Gallionis and Caroline turn to Hercules in amazement, not believing their ears. Hercules declares that since they first met in battle he has learned a lot. He is now even better than he was before. He turns to Dalios, reminding him that he has agreed to plead guilty. Now the hero asks if he can hear the terms of a peace agreement. Dalios says that all the lands will go to Hercules as a reward. In return, he asks to spare the lives of his close friends, whom he raised since they were little. Galfus Gallionis looks at him in surprise, and Hercules does not hide his surprise either. Galfus Gallionis swears that if only he knew how much trouble they could cause. Dalios calmly suggests that they could simply be sent away. Dalios says that they are the only ones who stayed with him until the very end. The other soldiers are given complete freedom. They can decide their own fate, surrender to the crowd, or take revenge on the previous emperor on their own. Let everyone do as they wish. Hercules rises from his chair, agrees with him, and declares that he will spare the lives of his subordinates. Carolina Gallionis and Galfus Gallionis simultaneously address Hercules indignantly. But he calmly adds that he will also have one condition. Hercules claims that it is simply impossible to estimate the damage they have done to the empire and its authority. He says that even a whole bunch of the heads of his subordinates could not compensate for this loss. Moreover, even if his own head were given away, for 10 million inhabitants to play with like a ball, it would still not wash away their guilt. Dalios bowed his head and quietly asked what he should do next. Hercules only smiled in response. Hercules turns to Dalios and declares that he will become his vassal. Dalios clearly did not expect such a condition and was stunned. Galthius Gallionis, along with Carolina Gallionis, watched this scene in horror. Galfus Gallionis and Carolina Gallionis ask Hercules in surprise what he is talking about. At this point, Dalios cannot hold back his laughter. He says that he always thought Hercules was an oddball, but he never imagined how unusual he was. Dalios asks doubtfully if he really wants to make a vassal of the one who forever inscribed his father's shame in history. Hercules just smiles in response and says, "Is that really such a strange thing?" Hercules notices that his predecessor has done nothing but lose. Now Lemuria has lost even a crumb of its former strength. So he decides, why not find an experienced warrior for his own benefit? In addition, another difficulty arose. Now Galvest Gallionis was the only experienced commander who could be entrusted with a detachment of 10,000 fighters. Hercules notes that their army is inferior to the mercenaries in skill, so he wants to learn new skills. In addition, he intends to pay the reward that his predecessor appropriated for himself. Dalios turns away and addresses His Highness Hercules. "Don't laugh at this. He's a mercenary. He can sneakily shoot a bow in the back." But Hercules replies that he's completely serious now. Dalios asks what will happen if he refuses. Hercules is initially surprised by such a question and looks at him carefully. And then he laughed loudly, frightening both Galliona and Carolina. Hercules turns to Dalios and says that he has just offered him a wonderful place in the sun. But when he sees how Dalios reacts, as if he is disgusted by the very thought of being someone's little dog, Hercules realizes. He laughs, turns to Dalios and says that he warned him. He should have shot him in the back. But suddenly the imperial blood magic unexpectedly awakens in him. Hercules raises his head and asks who he is addressing now. Suddenly Dalios began to tense up convulsively, as if he were gasping for air. Galthius Gallionis and Carolina Gallionis froze, not daring to make a single movement. Delos can't even breathe because he doesn't understand what this incredible magical power is. He still thinks of himself as just a boy, and can't believe that he has so much powerful magic. Delos thinks it's all about his spell. And then Carolina Gallionis suddenly loses strength and falls to the ground, gasping for air. Her eyelids grow heavy, her eyes slowly close, and she gradually sinks into unconsciousness. Hercules catches her and apologizes. Gallionis of Galphi is barely holding on to the edge of the table and breathing heavily. Dalios steps back sharply and, with his head bowed, tries to catch his breath, fear and horror clearly visible on his face. Hercules addresses Dalios and assures him that he will not drive his subjects out of the country. He intends to find suitable land to settle them there. Since their estates have fallen into disrepair, they will have to spend their lives restoring and cultivating this land. Hercules smiles, looks at Dalios, and asks if he understands what this is all leading to. Dalios gradually realizes that as soon as he dared to attack, he already found himself with a collar around his neck. Hercules put his hands on his shoulders and said, "From today on, everything will be like this. I count on your support." Dalios looks at Hercules with horror, but also with a certain admiration. He finds it hard to believe that he is standing before the son of the same senseless Hadrian III. Rumors spread throughout the great castle that Personia had been captured. Is this true? Has Dalios been defeated? Someone has ordered the news to be announced tomorrow, and preparations for a festive banquet to begin. His Highness Hadrian, brother of His Highnesses Titus and Hercules, also learns of this. In a rage, he begins to smash everything around him and shouts loudly in anger. The servant warned him. If he continued to rage like this, someone would definitely hear him. His Highness Adrian cannot believe that such a small country was able to achieve victory. He is furious and convinced that he deserves to be emperor more than anyone else. His gaze becomes even more determined as he clutches his black cloak. All the inhabitants of Lemuria rejoice at the return of their emperor. They look at the gate and notice a crowd of warriors led by Hercules. The hero returns home in triumph, and applause rings out all around. The townspeople greet him with shouts of admiration and praise Hercules for his exploits. They pass through the empire to loud cheers of admiration, Galvest Gallion with Christopher, and Hercules next to Carolina. They arrive at the castle. Crow, Lucanus, and His Highness Titus himself are already standing on the porch, and they say that they have been waiting for them for a long time. When Hercules returned, he asked if anything had happened in his absence. Lucana replied with a slight tiredness that everyone had been working diligently without a break. He says that Persona has already heard about his achievement, and it has caused incredible joy there. Hercules proudly replies, "They won," and this gives him even more authority. Hercules suddenly stops abruptly and starts looking around. His friends ask him in surprise what happened. He turns to His Highness Titus to ask where His Highness Adrian is. Titus apologizes that Adrian could not be present on such an important day. He knows he doesn't like to appear in public. Hercules accepts his answer. Lucanus approaches Gallifus Gallionis and says that she has heard of his courage and wonderful deeds. But suddenly she realizes that it is not Gallifus who stands before her, but Gallionis Dalios. Lucanus screams loudly in surprise and fear. Galfus Helionis asks in surprise if Dalios has decided to refuse Hercules' amnesty, which sounds rather rude. At this point, Christopher jokes that he could have been drowned in a sea of lemurs. Lucanos turns to Hercules in surprise. What is Dalios doing here? After all, as far as he knows, he was supposed to be executed in front of everyone, right? Hercules tells her that she can consider him a trophy of war, which scares her even more. Then he adds that he will be her vassal. His Highness Titus remarks with admiration that Dalios has excellent muscles. In response, Dalios suddenly turns towards him, as if about to pounce. Kral shudders in alarm. Lucanus asks if Heracles is sure of his decision, and then adds, "Whatever it is, thanks to them the war ended successfully. She has prepared places for them at the banquet, so let everything be as it is." Heracles looks at her in surprise. The crow noticed that Hercules was tired after a long hike, and there were no urgent matters to attend to today, so he could afford to rest a little. Hercules smiles slyly and thinks that, in other words, today he can do whatever he wants. He is completely free. His Highness Titus notes that this is their first victory in a long time, so he promises to prepare the best wine for him. Galfus Gallion thanks His Highness Titus. His Highness Titus assures him that he will certainly write a heroic story about Hercules. He asks to tell all the details at a festive dinner, but Hercules leaves the scene. He instantly disappears. His Highness Titus asks where he is. Lucano replies that he was just here. Galfe Gallion looks around and wonders where Carolina Gallion has gone. He panics and asks if anyone has seen Caroline. His Highness Titus immediately understands and assumes that he has gone after the reward. Carolina Gallionis is embarrassed and turns to His Highness Hercules, admitting that this is the first time she has worn such clothes. She asks if it's appropriate for her to hide her face. Hercules looks at her with pleasure and replies that it suits her perfectly. It couldn't be better. Carolina Gallionis, wearing a maid's outfit, carefully covers her knees and, in a trembling voice, confesses to His Highness Hercules that she is truly happy then. She tries to pull down the hem of her dress to hide her legs, and Hercules smiles and says she looks great. That dress suits her very well. Carolina Gallionis felt a chill run down her body. She turned to him with a request. Can she change her clothes now? Hercules sternly addresses her by name and reminds her. He just explained everything to her, didn't he? These words make her even more embarrassed and confused. She, ashamed, admits that she is really just a submissive servant of her master and will do anything to serve him. Hercules is pleased to note that everything is going great for her, but she is only surprised. How did all this happen to her in the first place? She had indeed thought about the reward if Lima's army showed itself, but she could not even imagine that Prince Titus himself would prepare such a uniform for them. She constantly feels like even the slightest movement is lifting her skirt, and this makes her incredibly embarrassed. Hercules suggests starting by brushing her teeth. Carolina Gallionis asks him what tea he would like to try. He replies that he wants a black one and asks if she sees a red can at the very top. She replies that she will do everything and bring a ladder, but Hercules asks to wait a moment and explains that using ladders is prohibited. He tells her that she must solve this problem herself without any magic. She reaches for the jar of tea mixture with a trembling hand, her other hand firmly supporting the bottom. A muffled moan escapes her from the tension. She understands that she won't be able to get it this way, but if she lets go of her skirt, then so be it. Hercules asks Carolina to remove her hand from her skirt, adding that it is in order. The girl blushes even more, but obediently removes her hand. She reaches forward again and again, convincing herself that there is still a little left in the jar, and she almost reaches it. Her skirt is raised. She wonders how she can allow the proud knight of the Lemurian army to appear before the emperor in this form. All she wants now is for him to simply not look at her. He stares intently, wanting just a little more. Carolina Gallionis feels his gaze on her, and realizes that she has already become the object of his attention. Hercules asks her if she's spending too much time on such a simple task. She hesitantly replies that she doesn't have the strength to get what she needs. Hercules jokes that she's an elf, so let her just jump. He asks her to be serious. Is she willing to disobey orders just because she can lift her skirt? He has provided the best clothes so that she appears in all her glory, and this is how she shows her loyalty to the emperor. Carolina Gallionis believes this to be true, as Hercules rushed into battle without hesitation to save her. But she hesitates even in small situations, unable to even serve him tea. She prepares to jump and jumps with all her strength towards tea, intending to thank him for his help. Her skirt is pulled up so that everything inside is openly visible. She quickly drops to her knees and apologizes for making her wait. She goes to make tea now. Carolina Gallionis notices that Hercules is hiding his face and says that she will have to think carefully about this highly respected gentleman. But suddenly she screams in horror, realizing what has happened. She brews the tea, blowing softly on it with her lips. Then she turns to His Highness Hercules and warns him to wait a little longer for the tea leaves to steep. Hercules notices that she is angry, but despite this, she continues to address him as Sir. He gently calls her name and asks her to come over for reconciliation. She finally agrees, pushes the tabletop aside, and cautiously approaches him. Hercules slaps his knees and invites her to sit down. She hesitates, saying she's too heavy for that, but Hercules just smiles and says it's okay, because that's how it's supposed to be. She sits on his lap, but avoids his gaze. Hercules asks what happened to her. After all, during training she does this without hesitation. The girl replies that this is not training at all. Hercules suddenly hugs her tightly and tells her how cute she is. But she screams back that she won't let herself be bought with such cheap compliments. He sincerely apologizes to her, admitting that he must have gone a little overboard with his jokes. He apologizes again, trying to smooth things over. Carolina Gallionis asked if something was bothering him. He didn't try to hide it and admitted, indeed, it was. All his life he had always watched his father's back, and now for the first time he had gone to war himself. Now a great responsibility had fallen upon him, and it was quite a burden. He explains that the common people closely follow the emperor, political and financial matters, and how the infrastructure is developing. That is why he needed to win this war, so that the people could accept him. Hercules admits that after the victory, the number of people dissatisfied with him will finally decrease, and this thought made him feel much lighter, as if a mountain had fallen from his shoulders. But most importantly, Carolina was saved. Carolina Gallion says that then he should show up at the banquet and appear before Christ and the rest of the officials in all his heroic grandeur. She asks him to demonstrate his strength and courage as they did before her on the battlefield. Without a moment's hesitation, he resolutely marches towards her. Hercules looks at her in surprise. Seeing his reaction, Carolina Gallionis begins to doubt her words and apologizes. At such a moment, she probably should have addressed him as the emperor, but it seems she said too much. Hercules plays with her cheeks, but the girl doesn't understand anything and asks what he's doing. Hercules doesn't hear her and continues to pull her cheeks further. Hercules agrees. She is right. If he does so, Christ will not reproach him for it. He asked her to remain his maid for a while longer. With a broad smile, she gently runs her hand over his palm and happily agrees. Their lips merge in a kiss full of love. Hercules and Carolina Gallionis appear at the festival. Christopher points out to the crowd where Dalios and Galphas Gallionis are putting on a muscle show, with the frail Crowley standing timidly behind them. His Majesty Titus himself took this photo and depicted Hercules in the center. Hercules points at Christopher, who resists and tries to escape. Golpha Galonius puts his hand on Christopher's shoulder. He begins to tremble. Victory is his. And Dallio glares at Golpha Galonius. His Highness Titus tirelessly adds new characters to his picture. Hercules watches this carefully and looks quite pleased. Hercules raises his glass in a room full of people, and everyone in attendance cheers him on. Carlina watches with joy on her face. Hercules is fast asleep in the middle of the dead of night. Suddenly, an evil spirit in the form of a woman appears from a dark crack and calls out to him. He wakes up to find a demoness sitting on him, and the night itself seems extraordinarily beautiful. She calmly says that she has come to fulfill the terms of their contract. Turklice wakes up and realizes with joy that it is her, and the devil standing next to her says that she has finally woken up. She smiles slyly and says that she called him so many times that she thought he must be dead. Hercules is surprised and asks what she is talking about, since they are in her dream now. The girl replies that it is indeed so, and although he is already tired, a deal is a deal. It must be fulfilled. She confidently says that, as always, she will get everything she needs. Her lips press greedily against his, but Hercules doesn't even move in response. Her name is Asmodeus, and only he can see her. She is a spirit with whom he has made a pact. Once upon a time, Asma was a cherub. Once she was an angel, but succumbing to forbidden desire, she lost her wings. Beyond the human sin of passion, she became a demon. Among the 72 pillars, she occupies the 32nd position and bears the title of queen. If you make a contract with her, you can gain a great advantage. In exchange, she absorbs a significant amount of mana and bodily energy. It's not that Hercules doesn't like it. He trembles with pleasure and moans until the temptress leaves nothing to herself. But even in the moment of passion, Hercules begs her to be careful, so that this pleasure does not become fatal for him. She says she's just starting, but an ordinary person wouldn't have that kind of experience with her. Ever since he met her, a spiritual energy has awakened in him. He doesn't understand how this happened and asks, "Since when?" She smiles in response and says, "Since everything was left untouched." 5 years ago, the priest praised His Highness Hercules. He noted that the boy had coped with the task surprisingly quickly, so a brilliant future awaited him. And then 10-year-old Hercules replied that, in fact, anyone in his family could do it. It was enough to look into the library at least once a day. And everyone can do it. Lucanus wanted to say that other emperors had been defeated, but ultimately decided to remain silent. Hercules thinks that every day is the same thing. He is bored to death. Suddenly he feels a sharp pain in his head, and Lucao looks at him in fear. He doesn't understand at all what kind of picture it is. What image suddenly appears in his head? He has never seen such places either in other countries or on the pages of library books. Perhaps these pictures are not from this world at all. He has no idea what kind of people these strangers were, or what kind of places they are imagining. The only thing he understands for sure is that they are not his own memories. Lucano asks if he's okay and suggests calling a doctor. He replies that it's unnecessary. She notices that he's completely pale. Suddenly he gets even more irritated and starts shouting even louder. He says he's going to rest a bit and skip the move. He asks her not to tell anyone. She obeys him. He says that classes are over for today. Lucanos adds, "If there is any need, you can call the maid." Hercules concentrates on his thoughts. Suddenly a portrait of a man appears in his mind. He doesn't understand who he really is. And suddenly someone is knocking on his door insistently. Hercules asks to be left alone, but the knocking doesn't stop. Then he opens the door and sees Medea right in front of him. She smiles broadly at him. He wonders, is she really new? He curses in his mind. Hasn't she been told how to behave here? And this persistent, intrusive threesome at the door forces him to get up and open it. She stands with unwavering dignity. This is probably her way of greeting. She admits that she doesn't think she's chosen the best outfit. so she changes from her maid outfit to a light robe and asks if it will be better. Hercules is surprised and impressed by her change. Hercules nervously closes the door, banishing the devilish woman. He has difficulty understanding what is happening, as the clothes she is wearing are things from his own memories. Hercules wonders who she really is. He is startled by the sound of her laughter. She suddenly appears from above and confesses that she always enjoys seeing people's surprised faces. He can't understand how she does it. She notices that he seems to remember something else. He seems to be frozen in surprise. They ask directly what she's talking about. She replies, "Who's inside him?" Because this question has been bothering her for a long time. She calms him down, explaining that these memories are not his, so there's no need to worry. She says that this man and all his memories come from a completely different world. This is his past, not the boy's. These visions have no relation to the other world, and, importantly, they also absolutely do not belong to the boy himself. He wonders what other world she could be talking about. Maybe she means another kingdom? But she denies it. That's not the point at all. She explains, it's about another planet, a world that exists in another time dimension. Hercules asked her how she knew this. She replied that she had given him these memories herself. He clutched his throat in surprise and asked again how she had fed him. She thought he really didn't remember. She says that when he was just emerging, she transplanted the memories of this man into him. She wondered which of them would survive. It seems that a man without ambition had no chance of defeating someone who was distinguished by vanity, ambition, and self-esteem. As a result, the soul of the weaker one disappeared, and all his memories and experiences passed to another. She says that now he is truly himself, and that man's soul is no longer a danger to him. Hercules takes this news calmly. He asks her to wait, thinks about it, and admits that something is still bothering him. Then he turns to her with a question. Why did she choose him? She smiles and says that several hundred years ago there lived a man who was able to unite all the inhabitants of Lemuria and founded a monarchy here. He had once been her mentor. His unexpected ideas for founding a new state had amazed her more than once. She could not allow his country to be defeated. In the end, this man would have died anyway. But he possesses truly incredible knowledge and has an outstanding mind. He could be a salvation and a ray of hope for Lemuria, so she decided to use him. But the most important thing now is to sign the agreement. She flies right next to him. He still can't figure out what the contract is. She apologizes for not introducing herself yet. She says that among the 72 great pillar spirits, she ranks 32nd, and she is also the queen. Her name is Asmodeus. Hercules realizes that he is facing one of the greatest human disasters. If he makes a deal with her, his life will be ruined. He grabs the door and tries to open it, but it won't budge, and this makes him really angry. He screams, calling for the guards and Lucanos, but no one seems to hear. Demonic hands are already reaching for him. She pins him to the ground and explains that they are in a dream right now. So in the real world, he is just sleeping, and no one will come to disturb them. The boy tries to resist, but like a true demoness, she begins to act in her own way. She insidiously whispers that the price for everything will be his innocence and the proof will be his vitality. She claims that she will make him a real man, but he is outraged by this. Who could possibly agree to such a thing? She laughs with joy and calls it wonderful. She likes people who are full of energy and cheerfulness. At the same time, she is curious how much enthusiasm he will have. Hercules barely remembers what happened after that. When he came to, it was already dawn, and he was lying in his bed. He remembers everything perfectly, and confirms that it was exactly like that. She lies next to him, a devilish girl, tenderly hugging the boy. She tells him that after the contract was signed, he became a wonderful toy for her. He asks her to stop. Inside him, the nagging feeling, as if hundreds of insects were crawling in his stomach, still lingers. After some time, the man was sitting alone in a dark alley of the village. A stranger in a raincoat slowly approached him. He immediately asks about the goods, and the first man replies that he has the right item, but demands money first. The man silently holds out a bag. He returns what he found and wishes him luck, because it's no longer his business. Now he's moving on. Meanwhile, the man in the raincoat clutches a small potion in his hand and quietly says that all this is for the sake of the empire. At the banquet, everyone is sincerely celebrating the victory, filling the hall with laughter and joy. Meanwhile, His Highness Adrian quietly gets up and disappears unnoticed into the corridor. He goes to the main hall, where the royal crown is kept on a pillow. There he declares that Hercules is the emperor, which sounds like some kind of delusion. He says that Hercules is being too arrogant, constantly calling him Junior. Then he turns to his 3 subordinates and asks, "Doesn't the empire need me?" They just nod in agreement. His Highness Adrian angrily declares that he was his father's choice from the beginning. He reaches for the crown, wanting to take it for himself. Suddenly, he hears Lucason's voice warning him that he is forbidden to touch her. His Grace Adrian remains calm and unfazed. Lucano turns to His Highness Adrian, and he looks at her with hatred. He is angry that she interfered in his affairs. She explains that it is a great treasure of the Lemurian Empire, which has been passed down from generation to generation. Only the Archbishop and Emperor are allowed to touch this thing. It is not something that can be touched just like that. His Highness Adrian suddenly bursts into a scream, declaring that he was the one chosen by his father, and reproaches her for daring to reprimand the Emperor's son. She replied that he was right, because it was the Emperor who had intended to choose him as his heir, and that was exactly what he believed. She says she will ask him once again not to encroach on the imperial crown, even if there is the slightest hint of it, and if he does not listen, let him not expect to hear a prayer for repose from her church. She became angry, trembled, and told her that she would remind her of this some other time. Then she turned sharply and walked away with her subjects. Those priests say with pleasure that he simply ran away. Those who did not receive the prayer of repose are immediately compared to sinners. It is obvious that he will simply retreat. Lucano thinks he should be more careful, just in case. However, he notices that there might be something wrong with him. At this time, a real feast is being held in the castle. The table is bursting with a variety of dishes, soups, pizza, fish, and meat. Hercules, together with Carolina Galeonis, look at this delicious variety with admiration, imagining how they will taste each dish. The chef informs His Highness Hercules that he has personally prepared a sumptuous dinner for him. At Palazzo Margherita, caprese with calzone and tomato paste are already waiting for him, and the table is bursting with Hercules' favorite tomatoes. Carolina Galeonis turns to His Highness Hercules and says that the dish looks very appetizing. Hercules takes a slice of pizza and takes a bite. The chef eagerly asks if he liked the taste. He replies that the dish is delicious and even better than before. The chef happily notes that such words are real music to his ears. He promises to try even harder and cook in a way that will bring tears of joy to his eyes. Having reduced expenses on the infrastructure and maintenance of the palace, he directed the saved funds to more important needs. They use only the freshest produce from across the empire to prepare their dishes, and the kitchen is staffed by a family of the best chefs, specially invited by my father. That's why all the food in front of him is considered the best in the world, although there are nuances here too. He says he's tired of it. The cook, horrified, asks if there's something he didn't like, but he replies that that's not the case at all. He says that at first he really liked these tomatoes, pizza, soups, everything turned out delicious, but over time he noticed that the taste was always the same. Now he was tired of such food. He sadly asks if everything is okay. Maybe he wants to try something else. At this moment, Hercules is immersed in memories of his past. He says he wants to try curry. The cook thinks of a dish he calls care and promises to prepare it immediately, but Hercules stops him and explains that it is a different dish. He says that curry is a fairly common name. Many different seasonings and spices are used for this dish. Curries can be boiled, fried, and sometimes even prepared with the addition of fruit. The main spices are cumin, coriander, cardamom, turmeric, chili, allspice, etc. Sometimes black or cayenne pepper is also added to dishes. Carolina Galeonis is surprised that such a dish even exists, and the chef thinks that all these spices are too spicy. If he knows all the ingredients, he will be able to prepare the dish. Judging by the expression on the chef's face, it will not be easy to recreate the recipe from memory. Hercules tells the cook that he can search for seasoning even outside their empire. He then introduces a new cook named Knala, who greets everyone. The first cook tenses up nervously and asks what this servant is doing here. He remembers the servant saying he wanted to try some curry. Since almost all the spices he needed grow in his country, he has brought his own cooks with him. He says that he did serve someone once, but Messi's church changed his life, and now he is free. The first cook nods in response. He understands everything. Cornala shakes the cook's hand and says he's pleased to meet him, calling him boss. The cook is surprised by the politeness and kindness in Cornala's words. Hercules orders everyone to stop wasting time and get down to business. Nala immediately obeys his order, but the head chef asks to wait a moment. He says that as the head chef and a man who serves for the good of Lima Palace, he has his dignity and cannot allow just anyone to enter his sanctuary. He asks if he can show off his cooking skills first, and then decide. Hercules agrees and says that's fair. In this situation, he gathers several people around the table to conduct exactly that check. Hercules loudly declares that everything is ready. He has assembled the best jury to benefit the future palace. "It is time for the tasting," he exclaims, urging everyone to try the dishes. He has 7 people on the jury with him. Each of them must speak all the languages. For formality, he invited Kronal to work as the court chef. He wonders what that curry tastes like. Who knows? He hasn't tasted it himself. Gulfa Scalionis says he's already tried the dishes of the Sondilions. Christopher remembers visiting Sondila with the previous emperor. And Lucano jokes that for a simple bishop, such a luxury as a dish with spices is simply not allowed. Dalio says with a menace in his voice, "Let him just try to throw some nasty stuff." He doesn't even realize what he's getting himself into. She suddenly starts crying and apologizes to everyone for keeping her waiting. Meanwhile, he brings 1 large pita bread and 3 small cups. He imagines fragrant butter chicken curry, spinach curry, kimuli curry, and succulent tandoori chicken. And Galphus Galines notes what a wonderful aroma it smells like. Christopher thoughtfully adds, "What nostalgia." At that moment, memories of those distant times come alive before his eyes. Carolina Helionis remarks that it looks very appetizing. Dalios examines it and thinks that the dish is too hot because he is a cat. The cook watches silently, saying nothing. Luke turns to Chatson and says that first they will pray to the Lord. Lucano prays quietly, thanking God for the food. Everyone together respectfully accepts this gift, praying to bless the food on the table so that it can nourish both body and soul. Hercules claps his hands happily and announces that it's time to eat. He tears off a piece of bread and wonders where to start. Finally, he dips the bread into the first sauce. He takes a piece and tastes it carefully. Panther Dalios and Carolina Galionis watch him closely, waiting for his reaction. Kanala asks him if he likes it. Hercules happily replies that he likes it very much. He suggests that the others try it too. One says he'll try it with spinach, another chooses kimali, and the third adds tandoori chicken. Within half an hour, there's almost no food left on the table. Carolina Galionis happily savors the dish, remarking how delicious it is. Galphius Galionis does not hide his admiration and praises the extraordinary taste, and Christopher dreamily adds that this is exactly the same cuisine of Sondillon. Lucanos barely touches the food, explaining that enjoying such deliciousness is not a sin at all. Kragala wonders why Panther Dalios is not eating anything, and asks him a question. To this, Dalios smiles and replies that he is just waiting for the dish to cool. Canella smiles innocently, chats lively with everyone, and asks interesting questions. The head chef thinks with excitement that it seems his dishes have been appreciated. He hesitates, looking at the cooked food and wondering what the dish, cooked by a strange woman, really tastes like. In fact, he doesn't really like spicy food, but he takes a piece, dips it in the curry sauce, and carefully tastes it. His eyes widened at the unexpected taste. Hercules admitted in surprise, "It's amazing. The dish turned out delicious. I thought it would be much spicier." Knala apologizes and admits that he made it with his own recipe, which surprises Hercules even more. He says that it is very hot in his country, and they escape the heat by sweating coldly. When they eat spicy food, they sweat a lot, which is why their curry is so spicy. He himself eats curry, starts sweating, and that's how he gets cooler. He wasn't sure how the locals would react to spicy food, so he added apples and honey to the dish to soften the taste. Carolina Galinas shared that she personally would have liked a little more sweetness, but even so, the dish turned out very tasty. Canella happily replies that he is very pleased to know that even here people are familiar with the cuisine of his native land, and he likes to see the happy faces of people who taste his dishes. The poor first cook recalls his journey. When they called him a worthless fool, they said that he would spend his whole life peeling potatoes, and they advised him not to stick his nose in matters that were not his. They laughed at him behind his back, calling him a peasant, and he sat, peeling potatoes and at the same time secretly studying a cookbook. He dreams sadly of the day when he will be able to prepare a delicious meal for the emperor himself. Hercules raises his hand and announces that it is time to pass sentence. He turns to everyone and says, "Whoever wants to taste Cranel's dish again, raise your hand." When Galionis raised his hand, hinting that he wouldn't mind trying something spicier, Christopher and Lucano immediately supported the idea. Carolina Galionis says she would like the curry to be a little sweeter. Pantera Dalio disagrees and says the dish is already incredibly delicious. Hercules said that he would like to try the curry even spicier, or even with other unusual ingredients. Hercules asks the boss what he thinks about it. The boss thinks for a moment, then raises his hand as well. He says that in order to prepare more suitable food for the Lemurians, one must get rid of the habit of always grumbling and being dissatisfied with everything. Kanala happily thanks him for this advice. The cook shouts curses and asks to warn him in advance if such a huge dish is suddenly needed. The cook apologizes embarrassedly and explains that it is all for the sake of making tandoori bread. Hercules watches their argument with a smile, and then turns to Cronal to bring another portion. He asks the others if they want anything else. Carolina Gallionis admits that she likes the tandoori chicken. Gulfa Gallionis joins her in ordering, and Kimaleon is also happy to eat it. Christopher asks for spinach, and Lucanos jokingly asks God for forgiveness for such bold appetites. Panther Dalios continues to enjoy his food and says that everything is incredibly delicious. The chef stood up and said he would prepare desserts for everyone. As he left, he walked slowly down the hallway, thinking aloud. Looking at Nolog, he involuntarily remembered his own past. He looks at the coat of arms of his country and realizes that he is probably holding on too tightly to his defeat. He has forgotten the most important thing. People's smiles appear in his mind. He cheerfully moves on, promising that after such a hot treat he will definitely prepare refreshing fruit desserts. He felt someone's presence behind him and turned around sharply. At that moment, Hercules slaps his stomach and says with a smile that he hasn't eaten so much in a long time. Then the boss comes in and apologizes for keeping him waiting. He comes with a tray in his hands and says that the desserts are ready, which makes Hercules very happy. He brings a sliced melon and apologizes again for the wait. Hercules takes a bite and eats the juicy fruit with pleasure. He smiles broadly and says that such a pleasant sweetness is the best thing after curry. For him, melon is a real treat. Carolina Gallionis watches with pleasure as he enjoys his food. Nala treats everyone to a melon. Smiling, everyone eagerly tastes the treat. Only Panther Dalios looks at the piece of melon in disbelief. Hercules was about to eat the last piece, but suddenly something alarmed him. He noticed a puddle of some kind of liquid under the fruit. Hercules shouts sharply, ordering everyone to stop eating immediately. Everyone looks up in shock, staring at him in surprise while he tries to induce vomiting. Carolina Gallionis suddenly rushed to Hercules' aid, but Panther Dalios instantly grabbed the girl, pulled her back, and struck her in the stomach. Christopher and Lucano are shocked to the core, their faces filled with horror. Carolina Gallionis also can't stand it and starts vomiting, barely able to stand. Gulfaskelionis starts a fight with Panther Dulios and shouts loudly, asking how he dares to behave like this. But suddenly Hercules orders Galfi to stop, warning that the melon is poisoned. Everyone present asks in horror if His Highness has been poisoned. However, someone immediately interrupts the first, reminding them that such things cannot be talked about, at least not so loudly. Someone told me that they heard that poison was put in his favorite fruit, a melon. Now everyone is worried about how he is feeling and trying to guess who did it. The woman rushes forward, and the maid tries to stop her, addressing her as if she were a princess. "Where are you going?" But in response, she decisively says that she is in a hurry to see Hercules and needs to talk to him urgently. But the servant explains to her that this cannot be done because the former emperor forbade him to do so. Eudoxia is the mother of His Highness Hadrian and Hercules. She believes that Hercules will be the future of her country, and even more so, he is her own son. So it is only natural that she is very worried about him. She is terribly worried and cannot understand how this could have happened. In despair, she turns to the Lord, asking him to help her son. Lucano examined Hercules, making sure that his temperature and pulse were normal. He found no abnormalities. Hercules sighed with relief and said that he was lucky. He just didn't have time to bite the place where the poison got. Christopher wonders, who would have thought that someone would poison a melon? Hercules suggests that, most likely, they made small holes and let a certain amount of tested poison through them. If they had not noticed how the poison reacted with the silver plate, he would already be lying under the coffin lid. He turns around and tells Panther Dalios that it's all thanks to him, to which Dalios replies that he just noticed the rust on his plate. He points at Carolina and hints that someone next to her is literally eating her with their eyes. Carolina Galliona just sighs and says that she doesn't even know how to respond to that. Galfus Cleonis apologizes to Hercules and admits that he was upset when his former enemy hit his daughter. Hercules responds by saying that he understands his feelings. Galfa Skelionis sincerely thanks Dalios the dog for saving her daughter. However, he didn't even look back. He just turned away and let out a loud fart. Hercules now turns his gaze to the main villain and asks if he really tried to kill him. In despair, the cook looks up and begins to panic. He assures that he always cooks from the heart, and would never even think of harming his own creation, much less the emperor. Hercules then asks him where he got the watermelon. First, he draws attention to the boss's tents, and then replies that they were delivered by Her Highness Adriana's assistant, Mr. Domenico. He says that he met him in the hallway as he was walking to the kitchen. Then he was told that they were going to celebrate His Highness' victory together. Gallionis of the Gulfa family says that he seems to come from an aristocracy close to His Grace Hadrian. 4 years ago, when the land tax was revised and increased, he unleashed evil on everyone around him. Christopher adds that Galleonis has been on his Grace Hadrian's side ever since, so if this is really his business, then such a development is quite possible. Lucanos strains, then finally gets the courage to tell Hercules that this could be proof, and tells him about the crown. Everyone was stunned and asked if he had really tried to touch the crown, which was a crime. Now it became clear why he had not been at the banquet. Lucanos asks if they will look for Dominic. Hercules replies that it is useless. Dominic is only in charge of the import and export of fruit. Even if they interrogate him, it will not help them. The chief shouted at Hercules, assuring him that he had no idea about the poisoned watermelon. He begged to believe him. The palace supported him, saying that the chief was a decent man. He even shook his hand. Hercules angrily replies that he understands perfectly well. He was simply taken advantage of. However, now he can no longer say this with complete certainty, and until his doubts are completely dispelled, he forbids the cook from entering the kitchen. Hearing this with his own ears, the chef immediately frowned and the cannoli darkened. The guards lead the leader away, followed by Cranilla. Hercules turns to Carolina. It turns out she also tasted the poisoned melon. Hercules reminds her that he advised her to rest. But why is she here, instead of staying in bed? Carolina Galleonis replies that she cannot just go to sleep when Hercules' life is in danger. She exclaims that it is at this very moment that she must be there to protect him. Suddenly he pulls her to him, lays her down next to him on the bed and covers her with a blanket. Her cheeks begin to burn with shame. She tries to resist, but suddenly the panther Dalios gets scared and jerks sharply. The door suddenly opens. A woman enters the room, immediately apologizing for her intrusion. A worried woman approaches them and asks them how he is feeling. Galleon Galfa immediately recognizes Maria, and Carolina jumps in surprise when she sees her mother. It is indeed Maria, Galleon Galfa's wife and Carolina's mother. Galfus Galleonis scolds her, because he told her not to come here, but she confesses in response that she was worried about him. Hercules immediately assures her that there is no reason to worry. Meanwhile, Carolina Galleonis is nervous, noticing that she was lying on Hercules' bed. She takes Hercules by the hand and apologizes for her husband and daughter being helpless at the crucial moment. The woman asks if there is anything she can do to help her. Hercules then asks her to thank the panther Dalios. It was he who saved her daughter. She comes closer, bows deeply to Panther Dalios, and thanks him sincerely, but he only turns away and snorts in displeasure. Then she lifts him up in her arms and starts telling him about his muscles, which are exactly like her husband's. The panther Dalios doesn't understand what she wants at all. Mary turns to Hercules and asks if he's still hungry. Maybe he'd like some bean and garlic soup? Hercules smiles and agrees. Lucano agrees that this is a great idea. He explains that garlic can neutralize the poison and advises Hercules to eat more garlic soon. Hercules is happy and asks Carolina Galleonis if she will be there too. She shyly admits that she doesn't really like garlic. Meanwhile, he holds out a spoon and asks her to open her mouth. She tastes the soup and at the same time thinks that in such an atmosphere she is not even physically able to help him. Marie watches this scene with a barely noticeable smile. She quietly approaches Hercules and whispers that Carolina Galleonis is still pure and virgin. Meanwhile, Carolina is almost choking on her food. She assures him that she really did find time to talk about such things. She told him that she was worried about her future, that she was too carried away by martial arts and did not pay attention to other things. She was worried about whether she would ever become a wife. She kept repeating her vows, but even Galleon Gulfi insisted that such conversations were really important. Caroline felt a little embarrassed when Barry Hag called her very cute. However, she quickly turned to him, asking him to stop because the emperor himself was standing before them. Hercules recalls how, after the incident with his brother, which happened over 10 years ago, his father changed his approach to raising them and began to allow him to meet with his mother less often. He forbade them from calling each other father and child, and from then on they saw each other only out of politeness. This coolness persists to this day, even after the death of the father. She continues to visit him, but even when the emperor fell ill and lay down with a fever, she never came to see how he was, so it stands to reason that she won't show up now either. He tells himself that this shouldn't upset him. But suddenly his thoughts are interrupted by his mother's voice. The servant behind apologizes, explaining that he tried to stop her. At this point, Hercules calls her mother. Christopher tells his sister, the princess, that this is forbidden. She, however, does not agree with the previous emperor's order and openly resists. Eudokia sternly asks her brother to remain silent, and Hercules insists that he must speak to him. Hercules orders them to leave their mother. She falls to her knees before him. Hercules thinks that this is true. Now he has not only a fever, but also an attempt to poison him. And of course, the mother will appear when her son is in such danger. She tells him that she came to talk about everything that happened today. She wonders if they've found out who did it yet. Hercules replies that he is almost certain of his brother's involvement, but he has no proof. Eudokia raises her head in horror. Hercules understands. To his mother, they are both her children, but his brother has clearly crossed the line. But even in this situation, she will most likely behave the same way as her father. Eudokia begs to spare his majesty. Adrian Hercules freezes in surprise, and when he understands why his mother has come, his gaze dims as if the light in his eyes is going out. Everyone watches in horror as she makes excuses, saying that His Highness Adrian is who he is only through hard work every day. She emphasizes that she has always cared for him. That is why she has come to him today. She is sure that he acted rashly, but he did not mean to cause harm. Besides, he is his own brother, so she asks to spare him. Hercules asks if she came to check on him at all. She doesn't understand what he's talking about. The boy adds that she won't do anything to him, she doesn't have any evidence. Hercules tells Eudoxius that as emperor he cannot simply turn a blind eye to what has happened. Therefore, Hadrian will be brought to justice. She looks at him with horror in her eyes, clutching his clothes tightly and begging him to spare her son. Christopher tries to stop her, but the woman is unmoved and begs him again and again not to kill the boy. She angrily shouts Hercules' name. He looks at his mother and assures her that he will do everything he can. Her mother freezes with a look of horror on her face. She gets up, her hands hanging limply, and walks away quietly, saying that she is thinking about entering a monastery. He asks her about it again. She says she will pray for the peace of her husband's soul, for her son's sin, and for her own sin. She admits that she did not stop her son, and now leaves everything in God's hands. Her words strike terror into everyone. Hercules smiles at her and says that if she has already decided, then he will not object. He wonders what she has chosen. As she leaves, she calmly replies that she has already made up her mind. She says goodbye to him and, quietly closing the door behind her, leaves. An awkward silence hangs over the room while Carolina Gallionis dials Hercules. Hercules informs Gallion and Christopher of Gulfa that there will be an important meeting today, so they need to gather everyone. They immediately follow the order. Hercules adds that Adrian will be tried by the council. In a fit of anger, Adrian grabs a pair of scissors and starts smashing everything around him, screaming loudly about why his brother is so strong and why he just couldn't die peacefully. The servant informed Adrian that his mother had come to see him, but he had ordered her to be sent away. He was convinced that she had appeared, as usual, with the intention of subjugating him to her will. He is angry that he is also gathering the elders. If he can bribe the aristocrats with sweet speeches, then all his efforts are in vain. He personifies the process itself. Hercules gathered people around him, addressed them as respected fathers and those who only dream of becoming them, and announced their country was in danger. He claims that heretics and ill wishers have already taken some of their lands. If this continues, they risk losing everything. Hercules says they must take their rightful place, which his grandfather once fought for. Now he has a strong army, and this is what gives them a great chance of success. He clenches his fist, raises it high, and announces that he is starting a war to reclaim the lost lands. Loud cheers and support are heard all around. Everyone picks up on his words. This only increases his tension. He looks at the portrait of himself with his father and asks why he didn't give him the crown. He sits in despair in the middle of an empty room. Everything is scattered around, things are broken, and the torn and tightly drawn curtains only emphasize the reign of chaos. In the darkness of the night, Adrian is lying in bed and suddenly awakens by a noise. He raises his head warily and hears something creaking. A bright soul of a girl with short hair appears before him. She looks at him with sincere interest. Adrian looks at the girl in amazement, and she smiles and wishes him good evening and asks, "Isn't this night wonderful?" Adrian's cheeks flush. He rudely asks who else she is. She just smiles mysteriously in response and says that she thought people liked this way of greeting. Suddenly she spreads her wings. She declares herself to be an archangel and the first of the 3 pillars. Her name is Jebediah. Adrian can't believe his eyes and asks in surprise if she's really an archangel. He's so shocked that he immediately falls out of bed. She laughed and asked if this was the first time he had seen an angel, and he admitted in response he couldn't even imagine that heavenly creatures could dress like that. She approaches Adrian, pulls him close, and says she has a message for him from God himself. She tells us that Hercules will soon set off on a journey to the Principality of Trebussos. She says that thanks to his achievements and the surrender of the Panther of Dalios, he has gained enormous support within the country and now seeks to regain all the lost lands. She explains that the recent meeting of the nobles was called for this very reason. He is outraged that Hercules has already suffered because of a single victory. Adrian raises his head and asks where they got this information, and she replies that she found out everything personally. She explains to him that she only overheard their conversation, as she had said before. They decided to start by making a plan for the Principality of Trevisos. That was why everyone had gathered here to discuss their next steps. Then Hercules suggested starting with Delios. It is important to him that he learns to analyze a defeated enemy. He wants to hear Delios' own opinion, to which Panther Delios replies that he understands everything. He explains his defeat by the fact that there was no one around who could take command of a huge army. If there had been someone else nearby, the distribution of forces would have been different, and they could have better organized their defense and confronted the enemy. Panther Delio assures him that he had no chance to choose another commander. Hercules wonders why he chose this. He replies that he doesn't trust mercenaries. They are too easy to bribe with money, and they can switch sides at any moment. In fact, the emperor himself has already proven this. To this, Hercules proudly says that he is right. Hercules remarked that if this were a plateau, they would have had no difficulty in dealing with Panther. Dalios wondered, if so, which of the Fire Force detachment should go first. Hercules admits that he believes the main reason for his defeat is that he took the land from his own father. He says he understands why he did this and supports him. However, he adds, there is no point in this if you don't take up the affairs of the country later. He says there's no point in expanding your domain if you can't govern your country. Panther Dalios looks away shyly. Hercules laughs loudly and agrees that this is indeed the case, but assures him that he will not allow such a thing to happen and will do everything right, so Panther Dalios will have to try hard. Hercules notes that they have already listened to Panther Dalios' opinion, so he suggests moving on to talking to the Lemurians themselves. Galphus Galleonus noted that if we recall that battle and the advice of Hercules himself, there are no complaints about the chosen strategy. Hercules says that the main problem is weapons. Carolina Galleonus asks again, and Hercules confirms, yes, that's true, we are talking about infantry weapons. He says that during the battle in Personia, the infantrymen mainly used swords and shields, and one of the groups was armed with long spears. These spears are called sarasses, and were used by the Lemurians thousands of years ago. At 5 meters long, they are much more effective at arming riders than ordinary swords. But during the last battle, he realized that this was a bad idea. The warriors were constantly hitting the ground with their spears, and such spears were not at all suitable for close combat. Because of this, the order immediately collapsed. Most of them simply threw down their spears and took up swords. Their kingdom is surrounded by deserts, plains, and mountainous regions. Among their enemies are nomads and mountain dwellers who have perfectly adapted to the peculiarities of their terrain. If our heroes encounter a situation where they cannot use weapons due to the difficult terrain, it will turn into great trouble for them. However, weapons are not always shareable due to certain limitations. It is better to choose spears, as daggers are not very effective in such cases. They should use something 7 meters high so that the enemy cavalry cannot reach them, as well as shields to protect them from arrows. This distance will give them an advantage over the enemy. At the same time, all this must be light so as not to hinder movement, not to destroy the formation, and to allow the shield to be carried. The leader turns to his men with the question of whether there is any weapon that would meet these requirements. Everyone froze in tense anticipation, not understanding what the request was. In this silence, Panther Dalios suddenly asks, maybe then we can just use everything at once. Galphus Helionis remarks that it is easy to say something, but almost impossible to actually put it into practice. At least that is what he thinks. After that, Pantaraldios asks, if the emperor is interested in this matter, then what is left for us? Hercules remembers something. Frightening everyone with this, he says that they will equip their army. From now on, they will train non-stop until the performance. Jibril overhears all this. She explains in Adrian's room that this is how they prepare, step by step. He calls his brother cocky, but in reality he doesn't care about soul techniques at all. But then Jibril adds that their campaign will fail, and he asks what she means. She replies that to reach the Principality of Treviso, they will go by sea. But under the wrath of the spirits, these unfortunate people would find themselves in the very center of the storm, with no chance of escape. They would be caught up in the waves, carried into the abyss. In the end, they would all inevitably drown, helplessly floundering in the turbulent waters. Adrian doesn't believe this and asks how everything can go so smoothly. She replies that, strangely enough, in one of the worlds, the army of a huge kingdom was twice caught in a storm. After these events, people began to compose legends about the god of thieves. She says that Hercules doesn't even know about this. He is currently gathering an army and preparing for the campaign. Adrian thought for a moment, then shrugged and said he didn't care. Gabriel looked at Lee, as if to ask if he was okay. Adrian says that the throne he was to inherit as his father, along with the duty to protect the country and its traditions, should have belonged to him. He says he loved his father above all else and above all others. But his father's imperial magic suddenly left him and passed to Hercules, who could not understand what was happening at all. Although he was hated the most of all the heirs, it was Hercules who was chosen by his father, his vassal, and even the magic of inheritance itself. He loved his country and his father more than anything in the world. Perhaps he had more abilities, but he had taken everything from him. When his mother noticed the magic seal, she ordered him to obey Hercules. But his father, mother, and crown were all his, belonging only to him. He decided to kill the one who had taken everything from him. His only desire was to get everything back that was his. Jibril smiles and says that he seems to have been through a lot in life, but now everything has changed for the better, because his master himself is protecting him. He does not realize it yet, she continues, but soon he will take his rightful place and be the one who will lead the empire to prosperity. She abruptly pulls him towards her and promises to reward him with something special to make it happen. Adrian asks Jibril to stop and wait a moment, but she doesn't listen and continues to act stubbornly. He exclaims, asking if he is truly capable of becoming emperor. At that moment he suddenly wakes up, looks around in confusion, and realizes that it was all just a dream. He breathes heavily, asking himself, what nonsense? Where could an archangel come from? Suddenly he notices a sheet of paper on the bed, picks up the scroll, unfolds it, and sees that it is a map of the route to the Principality of Trabzon. He doesn't understand why she's here. A white feather falls softly onto his bed. He picks it up and looks at it for a long time, trying to understand its meaning. He starts laughing, happy that he can finally kick him out of his place. One day a man comes up to Adrian and apologizes. Adrian is surprised to find that he has already woken up. It's Dominic, and Adrian notices that he's just in time. Adrian orders Dominic to gather soldiers, but Dominic is surprised and asks if this means imposing a tax on the army. Adrian replies that no, it is not about a tax at all. Adrian tells him that Hercules is preparing to leave for the Principality of Trebizond. He warns him that as soon as he returns he will be immediately attacked. Dominic asks if he really intended to start a rebellion. However, instead of a direct answer, he just smiles and says that he finally got lucky and now it seems that God himself is supporting him. Suddenly he tears down the curtains, wraps himself in them, and says that he will make you feel all the insults and filth of his life, and then he will kill Hercules. Hercules informs his subordinates that they can proceed according to the plan. He entrusts them with the final preparations, and promises to announce to everyone that the lost lands will be theirs again. Christopher replies that everything will be done. Hercules says that his brother tried to kill him once, and he will probably try again. Carolina Gallionis squeezes Hercules' hand tightly. He turns to her, and she, with fire in her eyes, confidently says that she will not let this happen. She smiles, imagining that he will still fail. And he confidently believes that he has everything under control, as if he holds it in the palm of his hand. Hercules goes out to the people gathered on the balcony. The crowd below is standing, all listening attentively to his words. Hercules calmly tells them everything, without making any theatrical gestures, while Adrian, meanwhile, looks thoughtfully out the window. Several days had passed since Hercules began his plan. Everyone began to discuss the fact that no one had heard anything like this during the Council of Elders conversation. Everything was happening exactly as the Archangel Gabriel had described. Someone notes that something still remains unclear. The point is that it was this prophetic picture that Prince Adrian saw in his dream. Adrian is unhappy with this title, and as soon as the guy notices it, he immediately gets scared and apologizes. Everyone around freezes, stopping any action. Adrian insists that he be listened to. His father should have chosen him, not Hercules, because he is the favorite of the gods and the true emperor. He says that this message is a kind of reward for all the suffering he has experienced, a chance given to him by the Archangel Gabriel, and he cannot lose it. He tells people that the same thing would have happened to them if it weren't for his brother. Their lives would be much better. People fearfully agree, saying, yes, it's true. Adrian turns to the Bulgarians and wonders if they also found it difficult to trade with him. The Bulgarons are a nomadic people, mostly of one race. However, there are also elves of royal and noble descent among them. Sheep are their main means of exchange. From time to time, the Bulgarons are oppressed by the Lemurians, and all this is due to the fact that Hercules is dissatisfied with the terms of trade. They tell Adrian everything they know, and he just smiles and says he understands them even without words. He would really like to use their savagery on the battlefield. Suddenly, someone knocks loudly on the door, which greatly annoys Adrian. He angrily asks what the noise is, A servant runs into the room and, not hiding his excitement, exclaims that some emergency has occurred. He loudly announces that Hercules, along with a 40,000-strong army of Lemurians, has been sunk in the RTLC zone. Everyone is panicked. Has their ship really sunk? Everything seems like a hazy vision. Domenico turns to Adrian, asking what he would say in such a situation. And then it dawns on Adrian. He understood everything. It really was a message. He turns to his comrades and says that they are the best of the best, because they did not listen to his brother's speeches. He steps forward with the thought that this moment has finally arrived. Against the backdrop of his brother's defeat and his own rise, he wants to give each of them honor and glory. He loudly proclaims that he will be the next emperor. The crowd around him is not quiet. Everyone shouts wishes for glory. At this moment, Hadrian is convinced. He is able to kill Hercules himself. If Hercules uses the sea route map, he must return to this port, and they will meet him on the plateau next to the port. He planned to throw him off his horse and grab him with his own hands. He dreams of tearing out those tear-filled eyes with his own hands and decapitating his enemy. He gathers a large army and already imagines how Hercules will answer for all his actions in front of his father's grave. He stands among his soldiers, calmly contemplating the situation. Smiling, he jokes that he must be late again, or that the detachment in front of him is so small that he is not even noticeable. Here he was informed that Hercules' troops were approaching. He smiled greedily. Finally, this was what he had been waiting for. This was the only day he had really wanted to meet him. He waits impatiently for Hercules to show him his smug smile. Hercules' warriors are already standing at the ready with weapons. Meanwhile, Hercules himself notices Hadrian from afar. Adrian looks at Hercules' army in fear, not understanding how this could have happened. He cannot understand where Hercules got such a huge army from. His sergeant replies that they don't know. According to the report, most of them should have remained at the bottom of the sea. Adrian points out that according to the forecasts, they certainly shouldn't have looked so healthy and unharmed. He believes that the Archangel's instructions simply cannot be wrong. They really should have sunk and incurred the wrath of the sea spirit. He exclaims that he will never believe it. The picky sea spirits could not have liked the likes of Hercules. He asks, even if he says so, what they can do. Hercules watches their conversation from afar and reassures everyone. Everything is fine. They are already on their nerves. He turns to Carolina, asking if she sees this, and she awkwardly replies that she probably won't. A man appears behind him and scornfully remarks that this is all a pitiful sight. Adrian has not even checked the information, immediately believing that his army has drowned. This man is Edmund, the half-brother of Hercules. He says bitterly that having a brother who cannot think at all is a real shame, because such a relative only spoils the blood. Hercules laughed at his words and pointed out that this was their common brother. He apologized to him for his carelessness. This man, named Edmond, is a half-elf who comes from a military family, his paternal half-brother. During the war with Panther Dalios, he was tasked with guarding the capital, but this time that responsibility passed to Gulfus Scalonus. Proculus asks Edmund why Adrian is so different from them, since it seems they all grew up in almost the same conditions. Edmund smiles and says that in this case he would take such words as a compliment. And Carolina Gallionis adds that Titus should be standing there too. Titus indignantly refused everything and childishly exclaimed that he did not want to go on a hike at all. They tried to convince him that this was an order from Hercules himself, because preparations were now underway for a great campaign. He was terribly indignant at this. What did he care about their wars? Today the Muse had come to visit him. If he put down his brush now, he would be a disgrace to his family. He exclaims anxiously that if Adrian tries to kill him while he's sitting here, he replies, dying with a paintbrush in his hand is any artist's true dream, so he'll never leave here. While the servant reports to Hercules about the situation, Carolina Gallionis expresses her opinion. She also believes that he will not show up for the meeting. Pearlie believes he is being treated unfairly. He insists that everyone listen carefully to what exactly needs to be done before he can take action. He asks Titus if he wants to do some sketches outside the castle. Titus turns around, his eyes flashing with fire. Of course, he's going with everyone. Hercules admits that it is not difficult to bribe him. Edmund just sighs, saying that he is always surrounded by people like that, and he doesn't know what else to add to that. But even now, when he introduces one of the soldiers of the Imperial Army, he cannot correct the situation. He simply continues to draw some nonsense. Hercules replies, if he stays in his castle, he will not help anything. The probability that he will be killed by Adabran's people is very high. In any case, sooner or later he will begin to serve him. He watches Adrian try to understand what's happening and thinks to himself, poor Adrian, he didn't notice anything at all. My father endlessly bowed his head to the nobility, hoping to become emperor, and my mother, despite the prohibition, did the same for him, trying to atone for her guilt. He believes that his parents loved Adrian the most. In his thoughts, he turns to his brother and says that he did not take anything from him. If he had not made this mistake, he would have been able to become emperor. Now he is sorry that because of all this, he is forced to take over the country that his parents loved so much. He says they are starting a raid. Panther Dalio explains that this is how they found out about everyone who participated in the uprising. Thanks to this meeting, they got a chance to tame Adrian along with all his accomplices, uprooting the infection once and for all. Hercules believes that instead of a slow purge, it is better to wage a large-scale battle once and prove to everyone that he is better off not crossing his path. Galphus Gallion informs Hercules of his arrival. With a smile, he says that he has finally arrived, and, satisfied, takes the scroll from the guard. He asks how Christopher is doing, and he says he's fine, though he's sad that he won't be able to see his nephews fight. Christopher laughs and adds that he's being careful, and even went back to the castle for safety. He says we need to finish everything as quickly as possible and return with souvenirs and interesting stories. Adrian couldn't understand why Mrs. Gabrielle would say that to him. After all, he thought his army was going to be defeated, right? He remembers her words, how she assured him that everything was fine and that God was on his side. Sweat drips down his face and he doesn't know what to do next. He clenches his fist and mentally argues with himself. No, everything is not like that. This is undoubtedly a test that the Lord has sent him, and he is sure that he can handle it. He asks how large their army is. They tell him they have about 18,000 infantry, 2,000 crossbowmen and horsemen, and they have promised to provide them with an additional 8,000 cavalry as reinforcements from Bulgaran. It turns out that there are only about 30,000 of them. Adrian immediately asked him how many soldiers their enemy had. He replies that they are now outside the fort walls, so it is impossible to count them accurately. Usually, a regular army has about 20,000 infantry and about 10,000 archers and cavalry, for a total of almost 40,000 soldiers. Adrian replied that he understood everything. It turned out that the difference was 10,000. He joyfully exclaims that they have every chance of winning. He is convinced that they will definitely win, so they will finish everything here, on this plateau. At this moment, someone asks to wait for him and warns them to avoid the battle on the plateau. Adrian is irritated and wonders who he really is. He replies that his name is Oscar Alman. Then he asks Adrian to think it over again. Adrian is explained that he is the second son of the younger branch of the Alman family. The Almanis had owned the vast southern lands of Missouri for many years. They were the economic backbone of the entire empire. Because of their enormous financial power, the long-eared race is always jealous of them. However, the Almans also feel something similar to the elves. In the past, these two sides have come together in arguments or even fights more than once. And now the Almans have joined the so-called Adrian Weng. Unfortunately for Oscar Alman, the second son in the family, he has been appointed as an advisor to Adrian. Adrian is angry that he doesn't even belong to the main branch of the family, and now some nameless person is going to give him some advice. But it all depends on what he says. Oscar replies that he understands his feelings. He says that now their forces are almost equal to the enemy's forces, but their opponent is General Galphus Gallionis, who personally trains and leads the army. All his fighters are elite, and he considers the heavy cavalry to be a particularly dangerous opponent. As for their own army, it is very diverse and faces many problems, primarily with proper interaction between fighters. In addition, they wear the latest generation of armor, which they have not yet had time to get used to. But Adrian replies that in this case, he doesn't see any problems. Oscar replies that it's not just that. Adrian asks what else is bothering him, but Oscar just thinks silently. But in the end, he says that according to Ms. Jabril, Hercules' army should have drowned, but instead, they see a completely different picture. The enemy is well prepared and fully ready for battle. At that moment, he is seized by a disturbing premonition that the enemies have lured them into a trap. He understands that if the battle takes place on the plateau, the chances of victory will be less than if they fight, defending themselves in the fortress. Therefore, he turns to Adrian and asks him to think things over again. Adrian, consumed by rage, grabs him and shouts, asking if he really understands. Is he really advising him to hide in the fortress? He shouts that he has had enough of his brother's humiliations. Even if it is the purest elevation, he will make him fall face down to the ground, and this nameless one dares not order him, because he is the emperor. He sharply pushes him down and says, "If you understand everything, then go to your place." He silently stands up and asks for forgiveness. At this point, Adrian exclaims that God himself is pleased with them, so they should not lose their fighting spirit. Oscar left, certain that Adrian would not survive. Hercules would surely win. So now he had to figure out a way to get their army to come forward. 3 days have passed since the battle between Hercules' army and Hadrian's army ended. Both sides completed the construction of fortifications. During all this time, no provocation against the army of Hercules occurred. No arrows from bows, no throwing of stones. The war was already approaching, but silence and standstill still reigned on the battlefield. At the outpost of this Hercules army, Carolina Gallionis carefully surveys the surroundings. Panther Dalios casts a sharp glance and reports, the enemy is approximately 30,000. He says they prepared well. Hercules just smiles and calls it nonsense because they are still nobles. For them, gathering such an army is not a problem at all. In their empire, not only the emperor owns an army, even the aristocrats have their own warriors. Compared to others, this empire looks very vulnerable. Even if it was possible to repel an attack by marauders once, it is impossible to completely get rid of them. Most people who own property usually find ways to protect it, which is why it is not surprising that the aristocracy keeps mercenaries with them. Unlike mercenaries like Panther Dalios, aristocrats have long owned lands in different places. The main branch of the family has its vassals, the branches have their own, and so on, creating a whole network of subordinates. Hercules believed that by combining their forces, a truly invincible army could be created. He sighs and says that's why he doesn't like aristocrats. Everything is decided by family ties. Power is inherited. He says that blood ties are a great power that came out of nowhere. To give up such power is like neglecting a talent given by God. Panther Dalios smiles and remarks that this also applies to Hercules. In response, Hercules nods and agrees. Yes, it is indeed so. But these blood ties turn into ordinary red water if they start to spoil. The noble blue blood then simply loses its value. He offers to return these ties to God. Right now, in this moment. Hercules asks someone below what they would say in response if they had a different opinion. At that moment, they are approached by representatives of a different race. Helphus Gallionis wondered, could it be that the Bulgarons are not on the enemy's side? He had no idea why they had come here. At that moment, Hercules appeared and confessed that it was he who had summoned them. He says that the Bulgarian warriors are known for their skill in acting unexpectedly. Their true strength is manifested precisely in sudden attacks, but in open combat this advantage disappears. Therefore, he wonders why they decided to openly appear on the battlefield, and for this reason he sent an envoy to them. Hercules says that what stands before them now is living proof of his words. He addresses them in their language and asks what a young commoner can tell them. He replies that it was unexpected for him how he mastered their language. However, he adds that if you look hard, finding a personal teacher is not at all difficult. He smiles and assures me that he will be a good friend and a reliable ally. After all, it is not fitting for an emperor not to know the language of his people. Does he really not think so? A general approaches him and asks if he is really the emperor of Lemuria. The general is surprised that the emperor is so young. Hercules calls him to his tent, so Galphus turns to Gallionis and says that now everything depends on him. Gallionis bows his head in response and follows the order. Hercules tells the general that this time he is going to close his eyes to what he saw. The general does not understand anything and comes closer. Then Hercules offers him a deal. The general sits down, visibly nervous, and Hercules hands him the document and calmly explains that the agreement consists of 4 parts. Mutual agreement. Attacking each other or opening official trade routes is forbidden, and the king of Bulgaronia agrees to send troops at the request of the emperor of Lemuria. Lemuria will pay an annual tax to Bulgaronia. He reads these terms and asks in surprise what they mean. Hercules explains that their people lead a nomadic lifestyle. If they continue to abandon agriculture, life will not get better, because relying only on meat to maintain health is clearly the wrong path. To start farming, you need technology, grain, and other resources. To get them, you need to either engage in looting or establish trade. This time they decided to use the battle for the throne to take everything they needed. But if Hadrian did not take the throne, did they really believe that Hercules would make concessions with them? They ponder what happened. Hercules remarks that they are allies, so there is no need for enmity. Everyone assumes it was just a random mistake. However, they wonder, how far in advance can he foresee their actions? The general, panicked, replied that he understood everything. He agreed to sign the agreement, and from now on, Bulgaron would no longer participate in this war. The general feels anxiety about this man. Unlike his predecessor, he is gripped by an unbearable pressure. Before him is a gaze that seems to penetrate the very soul and knows absolutely everything. Hercules shows the treaty and announces that they are now bound by an agreement. After that, he orders his Bulgarian acquaintances to disappear from sight. The general understands that if he makes a mistake, Hercules will simply swallow them. Adrian is panicked and does not understand what the Bulgaron army is up to. He immediately orders his men not to try to break the enemy's stubbornness, as he does not know how they will react. A soldier approaches him and tells him that he has news from a Bulgarian envoy. He says that Bulgaria has made a deal with the Lemurian Empire and has decided to withdraw from the war. Adrian beats the soldier with all his strength, shouting curses and insulting the nomads, convincing everyone that they cannot be trusted. He continues to beat the soldier, shouting that everyone is trying to betray him. In his head, there is a complete lack of understanding. Why is this happening and why is it all for? Eventually he calms down, notices that the soldier is unconscious but breathing heavily, and a smile appears on his face. He stands up and, in a trembling voice, assures everyone that everything is fine. Moreover, everything only becomes more interesting because God is on his side. This is the test after which he is destined to take the throne. He mutters quietly to himself. The difference is always 10,000. It's nothing. He is sure that he will defeat Hercules. He reminds himself with delight that Mr. Biddle said, "The future of Lemuria depends on him," so he simply cannot lose. He says that it is enough to throw stones. It is time to take up arms. At this very moment the soldier stands up. Seeing the Bulgarians from afar, Hercules notices that they seem to have fulfilled part of the agreement. He considers it much better than the personal troops of aristocrats who have difficulty obeying orders. The Bulgarian army is the army of the people, and the level of management here is completely different, modern. The main obstacle is now gone. Hercules takes out his sword and decisively says that it is time to fight. He orders all his subordinates to take their positions. Hercules rages, calling for the merchants to be crushed. And Hadrian exclaims that the self-proclaimed emperor must be killed because God himself is on his side. The attack has begun. Archers draw their bowstrings, and crossbowmen compete with them, releasing arrows into the sky. The air is already covered with colorful arrows, but the warriors do not stop. They move forward without fear and continue their assault. In the midst of war, countless arrows whistle through the air. Crossbowmen relentlessly release one after another, calling on the spirits of the wind for help. They are ordered to dance with the arrows now. Hercules notices everything from afar and gives the order to the heavy cavalry to move forward. At this moment, one of the soldiers gives a signal to everyone. Carolina Gallionis and her uncle rushed into the attack along with the others. Adrian immediately understands what this is a sign and loudly orders his soldiers to stand back and crush the cavalry to pieces. The soldiers obey him and immediately rush into the attack. One soldier steps forward and turns to the wind, asking it to give him the power of protection. In his heart, he sincerely wishes that the soldier of the false emperor standing opposite him would die. During the battle, the warriors again turn to the wind spirits, begging them to help them and prove the power of their empire. Gulf's galleon rushes forward at full speed. Fire burns brightly behind it. The opponents watch this spectacle in panic, holding their breath in anticipation of inevitable fate. As soon as Gallionis Gulfi passes by these soldiers, nothing remains in their place, only ashes. Gallionis Gulfi himself laughs and calls them pathetic weaklings. Galfus Gallionis solemnly announces to everyone around that no one can withstand the mighty roar of his footsteps. At this moment, the soldiers begin to accuse Caroline and Edmund of treason, calling them servants of the fallen Emperor. Edmund tells Caroline that he will go forward, and this news frightens her. She asks again what he has planned. To this, Edmund replies, he has not left the battlefield for a long time and wants to warm up a little. Hearing this, Caroline Gallionis cautiously moves away from Edmund. The warriors rushing towards them shout, "The boy is running away!" They decide, first deal with the old man, and only then chase after her. Edmund looks confidently at his enemies and says sadly, "How unfortunate." In his opinion, calling someone old just because they have lived a little longer than others is inappropriate. The soldiers look at him in surprise, not understanding what he is talking about. Edmund just smiles, assesses their size, and declares that he will start with them. He summons his spirit and Romalius, and instructs them to show these fools where to go by telling them about these soldiers. His spirit is a woman in a hat with intricate patterns on her face. Suddenly, a dark force surrounds several soldiers and paralyzes each of them. But they don't understand what's happening, because in an instant their weapons simply disappear from their hands, and they themselves can no longer move. Edmund's summoned spirit, Andromalius, has a special ability. Within a certain radius, he can randomly steal things from people, covering up to 300 people at a time. The enemies are riding on horseback and suddenly notice that they have neither a spear nor a helmet. Enraged, they demand that all of these be returned to them immediately. Then Carolina Gaglione runs resolutely towards the soldier, who bewilderedly asks her to stop, explaining that he has no weapon. But Carolina does not hesitate for a moment. She summons her spirit, Eligos. She destroys a crowd of enemies with one powerful blow along with Eligos, loudly exclaiming that it hurts her to even look at these people. She calls out to Edmund that it is her turn, while he mentally notes how fortunate she is that she has chosen to make a contract with the most powerful spirit, Eligos. Carolina Gallionis is truly an incredible witch, and he is happy to be fighting alongside her. Suddenly he notices the lacy underwear in his hand, glances at Carolina, and falls silent in confusion. He says angrily that all the things will be returned after the battle. Romalia usually drags weapons and armor, but sometimes she comes across other interesting things. The Panther Dalios laughed and boasted to Hercules that his warriors were extremely strong. To this Hercules only smiled and replied that all these results were the fruit of long and exhausting training. He had originally planned to send halberdiers to the front lines, but the enemy fired a crossbow arrow straight into the front lines. Under these circumstances, sending halberd, even with shields, no longer made sense. Hercules admits that he still wanted to go through with it, but he rejected the idea. Panther Dalios adds that it was a wise decision. He is sure that there will be many more similar chances ahead. The Panther Dalios asks where Titus is. Hercules calmly points to the side and replies that he is there. As the crossbowmen are firing arrows continuously, a giant tiger spirit suddenly appears in front of them. Its powerful aura immediately overwhelms the warriors. The crossbowmen scream in terror, not understanding what kind of monster they have encountered. And Titus stands next to the soldier, looks at all this, and says that it is beautiful. Let him destroy them all. He holds a brush in his hand, is near the canvas, and says with satisfaction that he is proud of his creation. Two soldiers approach Titus and ask him to hide his head, as arrows are whistling around him. They stand close together and raise their shields, shielding him from danger, while Titus asks them to do everything they can to protect him. He takes a brush, calls Decambria, and announces that a new work of art awaits them. A bright, striking flower hovers in the air next to him. The spirit of Titus, Decembrian, possesses extraordinary power. Real miracles come from his brush. The juices that this spirit exudes enliven any canvas. He only has to paint something, and the picture begins to live its own life. Titus says that now it is the bird's turn. Let it tear the merchants apart with its sharp claws. Thus is born a two-headed bird, which rises into the air, preparing to attack. Titus loudly orders the eagle to fly forward, admiringly calling it a beautiful creature. The eagle, spreading its wings, attacks its enemies, and with its sharp claws does not give them the opportunity to fight. Titus smiles and admits that it's been a long time since he last summoned a spirit. Although he's tired, the paintings he's painted are incredibly beautiful. For him, there's no better feeling than bringing his creations to life. Suddenly, an arrow hits the eagle's wing, leaving a hole in it. Titus makes a confused sound. He's been ordered to hide better. The enemies suddenly notice that the animals are made of paper. One of them smiles and reassures the others, saying that if they are just paper cutouts, there is nothing to worry about. He even calls the animals ordinary dolls. Titus, of course, hears these words. He begins to scream loudly. Is this really laughter at his own creation? If so, then let him meet his doom. He often paints various animals, and Panther Dalios watches thoughtfully from a distance to see if he is okay. Hercules replies that Titus has a strong enough spirit, but that won't last long. In his opinion, this enthusiasm will only last for a few paintings. At this moment, Hadrian sees everything that is happening and cannot believe his eyes. He indignantly calls Hercules a false emperor, not understanding how he dared to defeat them. He thinks, Edmund himself is not a danger. The real problem is this annoying Carolina Gallionis who keeps getting in his way. He says that at least we should get rid of Titus. After all, he can't even summon a spirit anymore, so why is he still alive? He shouts loudly that the crossbowmen will not last long, and therefore orders everyone to move forward in an attack. His voice carries so that everyone hears this order. Hercules notices everything from afar and loudly exclaims that their infantry has already moved forward, so it's time for them to act too. He orders Titus to be taken to the fortress and the crossbowmen to disperse and retreat. He loudly orders the halberdiers to move forward. Hercules turns to the Panther of Dalios and reminds him that, as agreed, the right flank is entrusted to him because he knows what to do. The Panther replies confidently. He is perfectly aware of everything that is happening. Hercules walks away from the main fortress, muttering that it's time to look at his brother's stupid face, and eagerly awaits this meeting. Adrian, exclaiming from afar, admits that his drums are getting on his nerves quite a bit. He doesn't understand at all what Hercules is up to. The two opposing sides have clearly positioned their forces. Now the strategic map of both factions is clear to everyone. The battle is reaching a decisive stage, and the final battle is near. Hercules ordered the archers to retreat from both flanks in turn, and the halberdiers to cover their retreat and prevent the enemy from breaking through. Panther Dalios orders the archers to retreat at a run, and the guards with halberds to hold their formation until the end. The spearmen are to cover the flanks and help maintain general order. However, the enemies begin their offensive, but they are hindered by a crowd of brave warriors who understand that it is impossible to advance further. Hercules, through his gift of communication, advises them to conserve the strength of the army and restrain their men from further attack. Adrian is furious and cannot understand what these fools are doing. He angrily orders the light cavalry to go to the aid of the infantry. The soldiers obey him and immediately move forward. Gelphus, and with him Galionis, sees all this and breaks into a cry, promising that he will not allow this to happen. He calls upon his spirit, and the flames instantly engulf the entire field. The horses begin to neigh in fear and twitch nervously, ready to panic. Meanwhile, the soldiers stand aside, confused and unsure of what to do next. Adrian became even more angry with Gulf Galionis, and exclaimed that, no matter how highly his father valued the boy, preferring a foolish younger brother over an older son was simply unacceptable. Oscar turns around and doesn't understand at all what this senseless Adrian is doing, because he gives one stupid order after another. He thinks, judging by the way Hercules' army is moving, he's approaching their flank and is going to encircle them. He realizes, looking at the disposition of his troops, that Hadrian's army is acting as Hercules wants. If everything goes according to this scenario, his army is doomed to defeat. He clenches his fists in despair, not knowing what to do next. Suddenly, one of the warriors falls next to him. Arrows fly from all sides, but Oscar puts up his shield in time and takes all the blows, protecting him. The warrior staggers in surprise, and Oscar asks if he can get up. He is given permission, and he carefully gets up from the ground. He understands that there are many soldiers and subordinates of House Almond here. He cannot allow the affairs of the Almond family to be disrupted in this place. He is convinced that he must save everyone, down to the last one. So he turns to his warrior with a resolute cry. They will definitely return alive. He walks forward, and Adrian watches and doesn't understand what's happening. The soldiers stand still, not daring to take a step, but the enemy shows no desire to move forward either. The battle continues. One of the warriors loses a leg, and Adrian notices another enemy flash past him. He is completely confused. Even the archers are not firing arrows, and Adrian has no idea where they are going. He looks closely and finally realizes that the soldiers are just passing by. Panic grips him, his heart pounding with terror. He immediately exclaims that this cannot be true, because there is a magical formation in front of them. Warning loudly that things are very bad, he orders the soldiers to retreat. But suddenly, Gelphus Galionis Carolina himself appears before the soldiers, catching them by surprise. Adrian freezes in horror and cannot utter a word. Hercules learns that they have dealt with all the light cavalry. He replies that this is wonderful, and it seems that Adrian has finally understood everything. Once upon a time there lived an old general of legendary stature. It was said that he had crossed mountain ranges, conquered half a continent, driven the Lemurian Empire into a corner, and become famous for his unrivaled strategy. Many people have tried to use this winning strategy, but without realizing its true essence, they have all suffered painful defeat. This strategy is based on several important factors. First, it is the advantage in the number of horsemen. Secondly, the strength and training of the military. And thirdly, the presence of a truly talented commander. It is the fulfillment of all three conditions that gives a chance for success. When armies use clever tactics, relying on speed, they achieve impressive victories. Without a doubt, such a strategy is worth keeping in mind until the very end. All this indicates a tactic of complete encirclement. Hadrian's soldiers realize with horror that they are trapped. On all sides, the enemy. Adrian loudly orders everyone to break through the defenses immediately. He rushes forward to neutralize the enemy archers. The soldiers are confused and do not know what to do next. At this moment, Hercules decisively lowers his raised hand, giving the command to attack. The arrows fly at the soldiers, and they all die in agony as the sharp points pierce their bodies. Adrian falls helplessly to the ground, groaning in pain, and barely audibly says that this is impossible to believe. He painfully realizes the terrible truth. His troops are dead. Completely surrounding the enemy is a nearly surefire strategy that ensures victory. However, achieving such a result is extremely difficult. Above all, the numerical advantage gained by eliminating the Bulgar cavalry, which was the real threat, was decisive. Heracles managed to create conditions in which the Bulgars were removed from the battlefield without additional casualties and without reward. This was exactly the result he had hoped for. Fortunately, the Empire cancelled the mercenary contracts and instead began to expand the standing army and train soldiers thoroughly. Previously, the Lemurian Imperial Army had a very difficult time. They only trusted fickle mercenaries to protect themselves from the Bulgars. Hercules was only able to implement this circle strategy because he chose his generals very carefully. Choosing the right weapon is extremely important in this battle. If the soldiers were armed only with spears, they would not be able to outwit the enemy. If everyone was equipped with halberds, that would not be an advantage either. They would still not be able to hold off the onslaught of the entire enemy army. In other words, to become truly strong, you need to choose the most suitable weapon for yourself. And finally, the last element of the mosaic is the Panther Dalios. Up to this point, Hercules had not been able to independently give complex orders to an army of 20,000 soldiers. But it cannot be denied that if he entrusted half of the army to reliable hands, they could immediately apply the strategy of encirclement. Starting from scratch, rebuilding the army, gradually improving the combat skills of soldiers, and withdrawing foreign troops from the battlefield. All this allows talented generals to completely control the course of the battle. The warriors surrender and beg to spare their lives, promising to pay any price they are asked. One constantly emphasizes that he is a vassal of one of the 77 sacred aristocrats. He threatens that if he dies, it will not go unanswered. Their families will not sit idly by. But he is killed instantly, just like all the others before him. They hide under their shields, trying to protect themselves. Some of them ask not to press, because it is getting tighter. Anxiety is in their minds. If they cannot escape the encirclement, they will not survive. Someone exclaims, "If Adrian is truly of noble birth, then let the paths open. Let him start negotiations with Hercules." But there is no middle ground anymore. Everyone is panicked, pressing on each other, and they themselves do not understand who and why they are standing in this battle. Hercules smiles, then laughs loudly and asks if they are seeing something they are not actually feeling. He shouts something towards Adrian. He exclaims words of sincere gratitude, because it was thanks to him that he was able to recreate this incredible strategy from legends with his own hands. He is grateful that he allowed him to become a younger brother. He is happy to have such an obedient and loyal brother by his side. Panther Dalios, hearing all this, mentally recalls, "It has been about 1,000 years since the strategy of encirclement appeared. And now, standing before him, a young man who was barely 15 years old, and he not only understood this strategy, he mastered it brilliantly. Although how many people have tried to repeat this tactic and failed is hard to even imagine. He thinks about the fact that the average lifespan of elves is 200 years, which means he has another 185 years of new experiences ahead of him. The thought makes him smile. He says he's looking forward to the future. Hercules hears these words through the link and asks what exactly he just said. Panther Dalios brushes it off. He says it's nothing special. He was just thinking out loud. The Panther Dalios says that now all that remains is to cut off their path so that they cannot break through. He asks Hercules not to remove his protection, to which he replies that he understands this perfectly well. He says it's still hard to keep the environmental strategy under control. It feels like trying to hold as much water as you can without spilling a single drop. That's how Pantaraldio puts it. But in a situation like this, with arrows flying at them in a hail, he doesn't believe there's a single experienced commander who can calm the frightened soldiers and rally them to break through the enemy lines. Hercules says that it doesn't matter. Until a true commander appears among them, they won't be able to escape the encirclement. Not even a fly can escape such a trap. Suddenly a warrior bursts through the crowd, and Hercules, along with Dalios the Panthers, freeze in surprise. It's Oscar. He loudly declares that the House of Almond is not destined to be defeated today. He loudly orders everyone to move forward, and the people immediately obey and follow him. Hercules' soldiers shout to each other to quickly restore order and prevent anyone from escaping. Hercules turns to the Panther Dalios and asks if he can break through the enemy ring on his own. He replies that if he's lucky, he might survive. His chances are only 1 in 100. To this, Hercules says that he understands him, but in his opinion, the chances are much higher, about 1 in 10. He assures that this was not what determined the outcome of the battle. Besides, such behavior could tarnish his reputation. Panther Dalios laughs and notes that even a great general of the Imperial Army of Lemuria has left the battlefield several times. There is nothing shameful in this. Hercules smiles and tells Panther Dalios to watch closely. It seems they just got lucky to find another extraordinary talent. Most of the aristocrats, led by Hadrian, died under a hail of arrows when they were surrounded by Hercules' troops. Those who led the mercenaries but stayed behind, not taking part in the battle or helping raise funds for the army, were all arrested by Christopher's men. And Adrian, the leader of the rebellion, disappeared during the storming of the fortress. and all Edmund found at the scene of the battle was his helmet. Adrian came to the Bulgars with a request to grant him asylum in their kingdom. Those present began to look at each other in surprise, not believing their ears. They did not expect this. Adrian is now being held by soldiers. He screams, trying to understand what is happening, and demands to be released. He is haunted by the question, what do they want, and why is it all for? Adrian speaks in his own language, but finds no response. Then he demands that someone explain everything to him in a language he understands. The Bulgaronian replied that even if he wanted to help, he himself knew very well what was happening around him. While Adrian was trying to find refuge in the kingdom of Balgaron, he was arrested and taken straight to the court of Lemuria. Yes, Hadrian's plan to seize the throne was a complete fiasco. His army suffered a crushing defeat. There before him, on his knees, appeared the traitor to the throne of Hadrian, his hands firmly tied behind his back. Around him stood Christopher, Carolina Gallionis, Gulfus Gallionis, and next to them, Hercules himself. On the third day after the suppression of the uprising, Hadrian, the leader of the rebels, along with 100 of his accomplices, awaited trial for the crimes they had committed. Hercules demands from one of the aristocrats that he briefly and clearly explain why he took part in the uprising. He replies that he is doing this to protect Hercules from threats that may arise from within. Hercules says, if this is so, then let him answer why he proclaimed Hadrian emperor then. He was confused, not knowing what to say. But Hercules just smiled and explained that he had simply been dragged away. He agreed with the surprise that reigned around him. Hercules tells us that nobles who had more power and authority than he did had tricked him into taking over his wealth and subjugating his warriors. He is not even sure which of them was behind the deception. He can't believe his eyes. It seems to Hercules that they are just trying to trick him, although on the outside everything looks exactly like that. He immediately guesses what it is leading to and exclaims that everything is true. He has been framed. Hercules asks who did it. He begins to say that there was a traitor among them who deceived him. Then he falls silent, unable to find the words. Galfi Gallionius immediately understands. This man is trying to save himself by shifting the blame to more influential aristocrats. If he values his life so much, he should support the majesty of the king, and not humiliate himself and repent now. Hercules says that if he is really involved in the rebellion, he and his entire family will be killed. But his family has served Giuliano's family faithfully for many years, and he can't just ignore it. Hercules declares that as the head of the family, he has passed the sentence, 30 years of hard labor. He will personally take care of his family, his vassals and their families. That is all he wanted to say. He bows low and gives his sincere thanks. In his heart is a gratitude and tenderness that he will carry throughout his life. He is taken away with them. Hercules says he will never forget these words for the rest of his life. However, he has no doubt that 3 years will pass and no one will remember them. He calls the next one and asks if he has been deceived by time. He asks the same question to all the lesser aristocrats in order to obtain a formal basis for mitigating the sentence. There were several reasons for this decision. You can't just execute all the aristocrats. During the uprising, many noble families were destroyed. Over time, their power began to weaken and gradually disappeared. The resulting power vacuum will open the door for younger houses, who will surely seize the opportunity, gain more influence, and eventually take the place of the old great families. As Hercules has already noted, having lost the remnants of influence, the nobility no longer poses a threat to imperial power. They lost everything during the uprising. For the last time, their power will remain only in memory, under a proud name. That is why a sentence of imprisonment, fines, and forced labor will be a just decision. Hercules makes the following argument. This is the third and final reason. One of Hadrian's key allies had considerable political power, a high-ranking aristocrat and representative of the half-elven nobility. He understands his situation well, and is sure that they will not dare to execute him. Why? Because he has sincerely apologized and is confident in his rightness. Even if all those present in the courtroom are rowers of the imperial court, among them there are those who still owe him debts. Thanks to their support, he will be able to avoid punishment. Feeling safe, he understands. In such a situation, Hercules will be forced to resort to extreme measures. Hans is a cocky fool. He starts to speak, trying to explain something, but Hercules interrupts him and says that there are several charges against him. Hans doesn't understand what this means. Hercules informs Hans that he has been sentenced to imperial liquidation and that he will lose his noble status from that moment on. Hans is shocked and filled with fear. He certainly did not expect such a sentence. Hercules says that he is destined to remain alone for the rest of his days. After his death, his body will be burned. He begs to be allowed to live a little longer to avoid this fate. Hercules wants his suffering to last forever. Hans shouts that this is wrong. He can't do this. He's a nobleman, a man of high birth. How dare this guy treat him like some commoner? It's better to end it all. Just kill him. Let him die with honor. Hercules calls the next. From the very beginning, his true target was the highest families of the aristocracy. Simply put, he sought to punish the high-ranking aristocrats, whom no one would normally dare to offend. By shifting all responsibility for the actions of the younger nobles onto them, he ensured that no one in the courtroom even thought of challenging his decision. Moreover, the aristocrats who had to betray their recent allies were unlikely to dare to oppose him in the future. Starting a rebellion did not mean saving one's own life. Even if someone were to consider uniting with other families, the main thing for the younger participants was to feel the full complexity of the situation and see its true essence. Sentenced to imprisonment with confiscation of property for the lesser nobility and for the higher nobility, the deprivation of imperial titles. This is how he was able to purge the Lemurian imperial court of several dozen great families. Finally, the main culprit of the whole celebration, Adrian, approaches them. Christopher immediately pushes him hard, and he falls face down. He wanted to object, but everyone around him immediately silenced him, reminding him that he was standing before the emperor himself. Hercules smiled at him and said that they hadn't seen each other in a while, addressing Adrian as his older brother. He thoughtfully asks, when was the last time they spoke to each other face to face? Or maybe this is their first real conversation. Hercules says that only his friend Lord Dominic told him about it. He also asks if it was his idea, that poisoned watermelon. He says that this was the first time he saw how poison affects silver. It was a real miracle. He also notes that he really liked the dish. In his opinion, salty melon, juicy sweet tomatoes, and poison are an incredible combination of flavors. He assures that he hasn't tasted it, so he doesn't know for sure. He adds that the battle on the plain will definitely go down in history, in particular due to the use of the tactic of complete encirclement. He is even willing to bet that in several hundred years he was the only one who managed to successfully apply this strategy. Hercules asks him if he even realizes that before the Balgoran cavalry left the battlefield, they had a great chance of victory. In an open clash, with reinforcements from the Balgoran and the mercenaries they had gathered, victory was quite real. And here Hadrian openly admits, he is not worthy of the imperial throne. Hercules is silent. He believes that he should have inherited the throne after his father's death. He has repeated this more than once. However, from the very birth of his father, everything was given to him, to the little one who had no right to become the heir to the throne. He loudly addresses all the aristocrats, declaring that they have fallen victim to the deception of this false emperor. He urges them not to allow the impostor to continue on the throne, for these words are not mere accusations, but a prophecy conveyed to him personally by the great archangel Gabriel. He declares with a mad cry that he has been chosen by the gods themselves, and that he alone is destined to become the rightful emperor of the great Lemurian Empire. Everyone begins to wonder aloud if he really spoke of Gabriel, the archangel whom no one has ever seen except His Majesty Adrian. But he exclaims that he is telling the truth, and shows a feather from her wing as proof. Hercules explains that he understands everything, and confirms it with words. He turns to Lady Gabrielle with a request to let him into the hall. If he is allowed to do so, he promises to recognize the emperor in front of everyone present. At this moment, Garalina Gallionis begins to panic and tries to stop Hercules. Adrian smiles and exclaims that he will regret these words. He begins to scream, calling for help from Lady Gabriel, the great archangel, that the time has come to reveal the truth about the lying emperor to everyone. Adrian calls on the archangel to throw the emperor into hell itself. There is silence in the hall. He cannot understand why she still does not appear. Hercules waits patiently, without losing hope. He asks everyone to wait a little. He assures them that she will definitely come. In the past, he had called out Beatty's name more than once, loudly declaring that he was near, begging her to appear in the hall, tirelessly calling her over and over again. Hercules turns to him and says that he has only 3 conditions. If he follows them, he will stay alive. First, let him swear allegiance to his emperor and promise unquestioning obedience. Second, he must admit that his lands were illegally seized. And third, he must take responsibility for the actions of the great nobles who were subordinate to him. He says that only then will he be able to keep him alive, as his dear mother had asked. Then, in a trembling voice, he admits that he is fully aware of his responsibility for what happened and begs to be spared. Hercules says that this is a wise decision, and announces that by this order he is sentenced to life imprisonment. Hercules orders him to be taken back to the dungeon, but suddenly Hadrian snatches the knife from his hands. Adrian pulls out the scissors, and with a sharp movement cuts the soldiers away from him. Carolina Gallionis turns pale with fear, and Hercules cannot hide his surprise. The blades of the scissors shine, covered in red blood. Adrian jumps on Hercules and shouts that he will die soon. At this moment, Carolina Gallionis hugs Hercules, and Christopher Defense and Golfa Gallionis quickly draw their swords. Suddenly, Jabril appears before Adrian and sternly declares that such a thing is forbidden. Adrian freezes in surprise, immediately recognizing her. He begins to resent hearing her call him the real emperor. If that's the case, why is she defending this impostor? Everyone around is shocked. They don't understand what he's up to. Is he really talking to someone? Jabril smiles and assures her that she never spoke of murder. She says that Hadrian is an impostor and will never become emperor, no matter how hard he tries. Adrian desperately asks what she is talking about, since he was chosen by the gods. She replies that this is not true. It cannot be, and asks if he wants to know why. It is at this moment that Jabril changes, transforming into a demon loyal to Hercules, who looks at Adrian with a smug smile. In horror, he realizes that he has been cruelly deceived, and that Hercules only wishes Adrian good luck. Out of rage and despair, he cries out, shouts in displeasure, and curses Hercules. He exclaims that Hercules is the devil himself and demands that he return the crown to him. Galfi Gallion is so surprised that he cannot even believe his eyes. Christopher strictly warns, in no case should this be mentioned before the grave of his majesty. The demoness greets Hercules, but he only briefly responds to her words. So all the criminals were punished, and the festive feast passed without any problems. Finally, a boy approaches them, and Hercules asks if he knows why he's here. It's Oscar Almond, surrounded by the treacherous Golfus Gallionis and the cunning Panther Dalios. Oscar immediately bows down and begs for mercy, admitting his guilt. He has drawn his sword against Hercules and is ready to accept any punishment. This reaction was completely unexpected for Hercules. He admits that he misunderstood everything. He is not going to judge anyone. And Galfus Gallinus and Panther Dalios ask to stop bullying the boy. Hercules says he has a good offer for Oscar. Oscar asks with interest what exactly he wants to offer him. Hercules asks Oscar if he would like to become a general. Oscar is confused, remembering that he once fought against his country. Hercules then admits that he has been watching both him and House Almond for a long time. But because the head of their family sided with Hadrian in the struggle for the throne, he was arrested and deprived of his lands and titles. When the head of their clan decided to support Adrian, he could not contradict him and was forced to follow him. It so happened that he ended up on board a ship that was sinking. Because of this, their home was also surrendered, which greatly influenced the course of the war. Oscar remarks that, whatever it is, he is sure that there is a candidate who is much better suited. Hercules in response asks what he is leading to. He is surprised to see that it was Oscar who managed to escape from the encirclement. So he asks if Hercules really witnessed this, and is told that he saw it all with his own eyes. He says that the idea of this encirclement tactic was to sow panic among the enemy, and thus deprive them of the opportunity to resist. However, he managed to break through the ring on the first attempt. Surrounded by enemies and under heavy pressure, Oscar remained calm. This is what helped him save the lives of his comrades in a situation where the odds were even. Anyone else in his place would have decided that there was no way out. Hercules notes that he appreciates his leadership qualities. A strong army absolutely needs outstanding commanders. With his support, their country's army will become even more powerful. He also believes that this is a great chance to restore the glory and good name of his family. Most of their family members were stripped of their titles and sent to prison. Although they escaped the ultimate punishment, the imprisonment broke the spirit of the head of the clan, and their family suffered serious losses after that event. He believes that by accepting His Majesty's offer, he will be able to restore the former glory of the Elman house. But besides that, he deliberately ignored all the crimes of his family. Despite everything that happened, I myself invited him to become my ally and found him worthy of my trust. Oscar bows and says that he may not have much experience yet, but asks to help and support him. Hercules replies that he hopes that the newcomer will fit in well with their company of senior masters. Oscar smiles broadly at him in return. Finally, it's over. In the dead of night, they celebrate their victory. Or rather, only Carolina Gallionis and Hercules enjoy this triumph. But Carolina Gallionis is still glad that all this is behind her. Hercules tells how, as soon as he had dealt with the vassal states that had once obeyed his father, his older brother immediately rebelled. Who would have thought that the life of an emperor would be filled with such worries? Hercules says that after all that hard work, the food tastes much better. Carolina Gallionis smiles and says that the cook has really changed for the better lately. She is sincerely glad that Nala was able to influence the cook. Hercules is indignant. Why is she talking about others when they are finally alone? She denies, confused, that she meant something completely different. Her cheeks blush, and she admits that she has also been waiting for this moment for a long time. Hercules smiles and says, "That's why she chose such a revealing outfit." He still remembers how embarrassed she was when she put on the maid's dress. Carolina Gallionis pulls it closer to herself and admits that everything is exactly as it is. Because she's his sweetheart, isn't she? It's perfectly normal to want to give something to the person you love. Is that strange? Hercules joyfully throws himself into her arms and exclaims that everything is fine. He hugs her, asking when they will go on their second date. She smiles and says that the rose garden will open in a month. Besides, the chariot races will start soon. They have so many exciting adventures ahead of them. Carolina Gallionis is annoyed that he can't just forget about his duties. The next month promises to be filled with meetings and inspections. Hercules indignantly replies that he already knows everything. He says that since his father's time, the empire has only strengthened its position a little, and there are still many problems to be solved. He says that it is necessary to improve relations with neighboring countries, appoint new generals, and revive the imperial army. It is also important to overcome hunger and unemployment, and also to restore order in the newly annexed lands. He says that it will take a lot of time to resolve issues with the western and eastern factions alone. And he wonders, will he have enough life to deal with all this? Carolina Gallionis replies that when it comes to Hercules, she is sure that he will succeed. In her opinion, he has already achieved a lot. Carolina Galliona assures him that whenever he needs support, she will always be there to listen. She pauses, and a silence falls between them. They look into each other's eyes. He says that then he can thank her in advance, but she doesn't understand what he's talking about and asks what he means. Hercules gently brushes her hair back from her face and confesses that he wants to see her as his wife. The girl panics, not knowing what to say. Hercules gets up, picks a bunch of grapes, and makes a ring for her from a twig. He carefully places the ring on her finger. Hercules confesses his love to her, says that he wants to see her as his wife, and together they can build a happy future for this country. She bursts into tears from emotion and then agrees. Here he was, the emperor who was able to breathe new life into the Lemurian Empire, which had once stood on the verge of destruction and almost disappeared, like 3 continents swallowed by the abyss. His name is Hercules I. His exploits, his reign as Emperor of Divine Light, are the story of an emperor who conquered 3 continents, and that legend continues right now.